Chapter 1385. Grim, who was hiding in the dark, naturally knew that it was time for him to act. Otherwise, if the coward decided to run away, the situation would be difficult to deal with. Grim made his move without hesitation. He did not ride on the clouds, nor did he summon the wind and rain. Grim simply stepped on the void and slowly walked toward the battlefield. As his feet left the airship, his body began to grow bit by bit. With every step he took, his body grew larger. With every step he took, his body grew larger. Grim only took 10 steps to cross the 3,000 meters to reach the edge of the battlefield. At the same time, his body expanded to the point where he could support the heavens and the earth. 1,000 meters tall, this time, Grim did not transform into a molten giant. Instead, he maintained his original appearance. However, his body had expanded to 1,000 meters tall, making his every movement seem sluggish and stiff. "Demon, leave our world. Otherwise, you'll die here today." Grim's lips moved slightly, but his voice was like rolling thunder that reverberated throughout the world. Wherever it went, the ground would tremble, and the wizard's pagoda would tremble. Even the few crimson wizards on the giant floating battleship could not help but cover their ears tightly, stumbling from the tremors. Grim's sudden appearance caused the entire battlefield to feel an indescribable sense of fear. All the magi and demons stopped what they were doing, turning their heads in shock to look at the terrifying giant that was slowly walking toward them from the horizon. The dark red dragon skin-soft armor that glowed with magical energy, the tight-fitting black robe, the handsome and heroic figure, and the black eyes that seemed to be filled with infinite wisdom. All of this was originally so elegant and pleasing to the eye, but when it was transplanted onto the body of a 1,000-meter-tall giant, it seemed so strange and full of pressure. All the magi and demons swallowed their saliva at the same time, finding it difficult to breathe. Grim. This is Grim? All the magi were dumbfounded, unable to believe their eyes. Meanwhile, the demons roared incessantly, using all sorts of filthy and evil abyssal slang to curse the intruder who scared them. "Foolish human wizard, you can't be thinking that the bigger you become, the more powerful you are, right?" The abyssal fiend looked like an ant in front of the 1,000-meter-tall giant, but still sneered at Grim's arrival. However, its words came to an abrupt halt as it suddenly became flustered and exasperated. "Damn it, why is it the law of fire?" The 1,000-meter-tall Grim landed beside the Alden family's origin wizard tower slowly. The earthquake caused by his landing even caused the origin wizard tower to shake slightly. "Andrews, do you mind if I borrow the energy of the wizard's pagoda for a while?" Grim's body was so massive that the wizard tower that reached the clouds looked like a delicate toy next to him. The tall and sharp spire barely reached his waist. After saying this, Grim bent down slightly and grabbed the top of the wizard's pagoda tightly. In the next second, violent and turbulent magical energy flowed into his body through the pagoda. In Grim's other hand, a wisp of golden flames appeared out of nowhere and became brighter and brighter. In the end, the light of the flames even overshadowed the sun, becoming a scorching sun rising from the center of his palm. The appearance of this ball of flames also caused the laws of the surrounding dimensions to become restless. All the magi and demons present could sense that the fire element in the surroundings had suddenly become unprecedentedly active, crazily swarming toward the flames like a flock of birds returning to their nests. Moreover, the laws of fire in the dimensions had also changed. All spells that required the fire element had become chaotic and disorderly, and the chances of casting a spell had increased dramatically. As for the abyssal fiend, it felt even more strongly. It could even sense the mysterious, unknown, and terrifying changes that were occurring behind the scenes in this world, and even the laws of the world here. Its ferocious eyes stared unblinkingly at the ball of golden flames. Its face was filled with surprise, horror, and even disbelief. Law of fire. How could it be law of fire? Was this not the sorcerer world? Could the laws of the world have changed, and the upper limit of power had increased to level 5? The abyssal fiend quietly sensed for a moment. There was no change, and the strongest power it could use was still at the peak of level 4. So what was wrong with the Sorcerer World's plane consciousness? How could it allow a creature in the plane to come into contact with law power of this level? But no matter how unbelievable it was, such a thing had still happened right before its eyes. Moreover, after the 1,000-meter-tall giant finished absorbing the magical energy in the wizard tower, it moved its mouth close to the ball of golden flames and gently blew out a breath. In the next second, an indescribable violent stream of flames surged out of the golden flames, turning into a rolling wave that surged toward the abyssal fiend. F***CK your grandma's wizard will. You bastard, you actually allowed someone to cheat. The upper limit of power is the peak of level 4. So how can this bastard cast law fire of level 5? The abyssal fiend was enraged, and it had already cursed the Sorcerer World's plane consciousness 1,000,000 times over in its heart. However, in the face of the golden flames, it no longer dared to be careless like before. It hurriedly used a precise teleportation spell to escape the attack range of the flames. Since even the abyssal fiend had dodged, the demon lords behind it weren't stupid either. They hurriedly scattered into balls of flames and dodged. But while they could dodge, the large number of low and mid-tier demons couldn't. With a whoosh, the flames rolled past the entire land, and all the creatures on it froze in place, their bodies scorched black and withered. Then, with a gust of wind blowing past, they exploded into clumps of black ash with loud bangs. The vitality of the Tier 3 demons could be considered tenacious, and they managed to endure the law fire for a while longer. However, every single one of them was burnt to a crisp. Thin flames were spitting out from their eyes, ears, nostrils, and mouths. They were like a group of blind people stumbling about on the battlefield. It was obvious that they had already lost all perception of the outside world. But not long after, their vitality was also burned away by the law fire. They finally fell to the ground, their bodies peeling off and disintegrating into countless fine ashes. The stream of flames didn't seem large, but it was unexpectedly ferocious and terrifying. In an instant, it covered the space around the spatial rift. Of the 50,000 abyssal demons that had been teleported here for more than a month, nearly half of them had died in the previous battle. Now, it was even more satisfying. They were directly turned into ashes by the law fire. Seeing this scene, the demon lords' eyes widened. They gritted their teeth, wanting nothing more than to fly over and fight to the death. But under the flames, they flapped their demonic wings and barely managed to hover 100 meters above the ground, not daring to come into contact with the stream of flames. Although they were Tier 4 demons, if they got caught up in this stream of flames, they would suffer grievous injuries, if not death. Nothing good would come out of it. Fortunately, their ranks were high enough, and they were strong enough to more or less use the abyssal flames. The abyssal flames contained a trace of the abyssal will's aura, and when attached to their bodies, they could resist the invasion of the law fire. It was precisely this discovery that made them feel a little more at ease. Otherwise, if they couldn't find a way to restrain the law fire, they could only flee back to the abyssal plane. Demons were violent maniacs, and their minds were only filled with killing. But when facing a powerful enemy that they couldn't resist, it wasn't shameful to choose to flee. After all, with their Tier 4 strength, it would probably take them at least a decade to climb out of the abyssal flames with the help of the demonic brand. Hence, if they could survive, they were more than willing to return with their spoils of war, rather than be kicked back to the abyssal plane in disgrace. The abyssal alchemist merely bellowed, and his body exploded into purplish-black flames, leaving behind a ring of fire that slowly expanded in the air. Meanwhile, its body disappeared without a trace within the ring of fire. "It seems you don't want to leave." Grimm's deep and resounding voice echoed throughout the area. He then raised his hand, and a dense halo of light spread from his 1,000-meter-long body, enveloping the space within a 100-meter radius around him. Just as the halo formed, the abyssal alchemist Melee emerged from the edge. It was obvious that he had intended to teleport to Grimm's side and attack, but the strange halo had blocked his attack. The Law of Fire. Only the Law of Fire could stop a Tier 5 demon's teleportation ability. Melee swung the Beheader sword in his hand, cutting through the halo. He then dived into it and swung his great sword at Grimm's body. In a real high-level battle, the bigger one's body size was not necessarily better. Without comprehensive protection, the larger one's body was, the more opportunities the enemy would have to attack. Moreover, in a situation where one's strength was insufficient, using a large incarnation would only weaken the defensive strength of one's body. As a veteran Tier 5 demon, Melee wouldn't make such a mistake. Despite being attacked from the side, Grimm didn't panic in the slightest. Golden flames instantly ignited on his palm, transforming it into an earth-shattering palm that slammed down. The two powerful forces collided in an instant. Chapter 1386. Fortunately, those damned meat dishes had all died in the previous round of explosions. Otherwise, this clash of powerhouses would have instantly wiped out the battlefield, turning it into a land of death. Amidst the violent energy waves, the Tier 4 demons and sorcerers covered their heads and scurried away, using all sorts of methods to escape the battlefield as quickly as possible. The most unlucky one on the battlefield was undoubtedly the Tier 4 Berserker. Speed wasn't its forte to begin with, and it had been heavily injured in the previous battle, slowing down its escape speed even further. Hence, before it could escape the attack's range, the energy waves and golden flames caught up to it. The Tier 4 Berserker felt as if it had been grabbed by an invisible hand, squeezing and kneading it with all its might. The Berserker's entire body was instantly deformed, and purplish-black blood spurted out of its mangled body like a fountain. Even so, the Hezra demon managed to survive with its powerful physique and tenacious vitality despite suffering from such a horrifying stomp. However, just as it was about to reach out to the nearest Balrog and cry for help, a golden flame rune brushed past its body. In the next second, the heart fire burst out, and the magic energy inside the Berserker demon's body was ignited by the golden flame patterns. A terrifying, inextinguishable flame started burning in its internal organs, instantly burning it to the point that it wailed miserably. Zaire, save me. Telia, help me all. However, no matter how pitiful and sincere the Berserker's cries were, the Berserker's companions fled even faster. Finally, the inextinguishable flame burned through the Berserker's internal organs and seeped out of its eyes, ears, mouth, nose, and pores, turning it into a ball of golden flames. The Berserker writhed in pain on the battlefield. A moment later, its vitality was exhausted, and it fell to the ground like a piece of rotten wood, never to get up again. The sorcerers and demon lords couldn't help but feel sad. This wasn't an ordinary abyssal demon. This was a Tier 4 demon lord. No matter which plane it was in, it would be a terrifying demon lord that could destroy the heavens and the earth. But here, in the Magus World's planar battlefield, he was slaughtered like a chicken or a dog. This such a huge psychological contrast caused almost everyone who witnessed this scene to feel a little sad in their hearts. Honestly speaking, the Hezra demon was probably more powerful than most of the people present. Now, if he wasn't careful, even he would become a sacrificial lamb to the shockwaves of battle between major figures in the planar battlefield. In that case, what kind of terrifying power did the two in the center of the battlefield possess? With the protection of the Wizard's Pagoda, the many level 4 wizards finally had the mood to pay attention to the battle taking place not far away. The earth was shaking, and the Wizard's Pagoda was shaking. The entire center of the battlefield was covered in energy ripples of various sizes and golden flame patterns. Even with their spiritual power, they couldn't penetrate it to find out what was going on. Wizard Matthew was old and frail, and he was severely injured by the Blade of Carnage on the battlefield. Even though a substitute doll had died in his place, the heavy injury still dealt a significant blow to his mind ocean. Matthew was panting as he escaped into the wizard's pagoda. Turning around to see the 1,000-meter-tall Grim, Matthew felt a wave of panic, and he was momentarily dazed. Up until now, his relationship with the legendary fire wizard Grim had not improved. In the past, he had hoped that Merva and Nicholas would be his companions, so that they could form a small team that could secretly fight against Grim. But looking at the power of the other party and his pathetic state, Matthew couldn't help but feel disheartened. The anger and indignation that had been burning in his heart silently dissipated. He didn't want to die. He still had a large group of clansmen that he needed to take care of, as well as hundreds and thousands of direct blood relatives that he needed to take care of. Once he died, these clansmen and blood relatives would be subjected to terrifying oppression and vengeance. This was something he could imagine even with his toes. He didn't want to fight anymore. After fighting for so long, the other party was still advancing by leaps and bounds. Now, he had even reached a level that they had to look up to, but each and every one of them were behaving like stray dogs. If the other party wanted to unify the entire central region, then so be it. After all, with the remaining power of a level 4 faction, he and his family could enjoy another 2 to 300 years of respect and glory. This was enough for Matthew, who had long since lost his path of advancement. Matthew's eyes flickered as he stared at the battle in the distance, but his mind was already in turmoil. But just as he was lost in his thoughts, another earth-shattering boom came from afar. Then, an even more violent and ferocious hurricane exploded from the center of the battlefield with specks of golden flames, sweeping across the sky with an unstoppable force. At the front of the battlefield, there were a dozen war wizard pagodas of different heights that had been destroyed by the battles over the past month. Although they had experienced the devastation of countless battles, they were still entrenched in their original positions. But at this moment, their existence had come to an end. As this wild hurricane swept across the sky, it completely erased the last traces of the war wizard pagodas. The terrifying shockwaves of energy crazily swept across the energy field around the wizard's pagoda. The terrifying golden flames caused chaos in the magical energy wherever they landed, creating a sea of golden flames. The entire battlefield was being swept and ruled by 2 terrifying forces. They entangled and fought with each other, and from time to time, bursts of energy storms would erupt when the forces were annihilated. Even though it was impossible to determine their energy levels with the protection of the wizard's pagoda, it was possible to make a rough estimate based on the intensity of the trembling of the wizard's pagoda. This was no longer a level of power that a peak level 4 could possess. Could it be that Grim had already advanced to level 5? Every wizard had the same thought, but they rejected the idea. The wizard world was an extremely strict, large-scale dimension. Peak level 4 was the upper limit of the dimension's power. Within the dimension, it was impossible for any power beyond peak level 4 to appear. That was because it would result in a severe backlash from the consciousness of the dimension, and even the backlash from the wizard will. As for level 5 creatures, it was even more impossible for them to survive within the dimension. Otherwise, just the endless suppression of the dimension would cause them endless pain. However, the scene in front of them was clearly beyond their understanding. Were they too backward, or was this world too crazy? At that moment, many wizards began to worry about their own gains and losses. But before they could let their imaginations run wild, they were more concerned about the outcome of the battle. The battle quickly came to an end. Battles between high-level creatures had always been fast. One of the main reasons why the low and mid-level wizards had fought for so long was that their attacks and defenses were still within the limits of the dimension's power. This way, even though there was a disparity in power between the 2 sides, it was difficult for them to quickly suppress each other. Thus, they could only slowly whittle down their opponent's power, searching for the so-called opportunity to deal a fatal blow. But such a problem did not exist in the eyes of high-level creatures. When both sides reached this level, they had already pushed a certain aspect of their strength to an astonishing level. The battle between them involved almost every aspect of the body, mind, soul, laws, and many other aspects. It was a battle of all domains. As such, it was even more dangerous and terrifying. After a few head-on confrontations, the rank 5 abyssal fiend Mary unexpectedly lost. His entire body was wrapped in abyssal flames, and he let out a mournful howl as he escaped from the golden giant's side. He dove headfirst into a spatial crack, disappearing without a trace. Before he left, everyone could clearly see that the purple abyssal flames on Mary's body were mixed with some golden light. It was obvious that Grimm's flames of law had spread to his body. However, Grimm did not seem to be having a good time after defeating Mary. 2 dazzling rays of light shot out from his 1,000-meter-tall body, slowly flowing on the surface of his body. One was the light of wisdom from the Book of Darkness, while the other was the fire energy from the divine fire orb. These 2 powers, in addition to Grimm's inextinguishable flames, gave him a total of 3 layers of protection from laws. It was with this method that Grimm had been able to withstand the abyssal fiend's violent melee attacks and heavily injure Mary with the flames of law. Despite being a Tier 4 player, Grimm had still managed to win against a Tier 5 player. He had to admit that Grimm had taken advantage of his opponent in this battle. The first advantage was the restriction of the plane's laws. This was the sorcerer world, Grimm's origin plane. Here, he was naturally more favored and supported by the plane's consciousness than Mary. On the other hand, Mary had to endure the intense suppression of the plane's consciousness. With this addition and subtraction, Mary's basic strength had been suppressed to the Tier 4 peak standard. The second advantage was the suppression of his equipment. The abyssal fiend Mary did not have any other high-grade equipment on him apart from the Blade of Carnage. It could be said that those who crawled out of the abyss were all dirt poor. Their powerful strength was built entirely on their physique and battle prowess. As for their equipment, they relied on robbing others. In stark contrast, Grimm, who was only at rank 4, had 2 rank 5 divine artifacts. The divine fire orb, in particular, was an origin artifact that perfectly matched his soul and talent as a sorcerer. As a result, his battle prowess was even more terrifying. Apart from this, the inextinguishable flames that Grimm had accidentally condensed also became the key to victory in this battle. At the very least, it gave Grimm a powerful means to threaten the main body of a rank 5 fiend. Chapter 1387. The battle had ended, but the shockwaves from the battle did not quickly subside. Grimm was still maintaining his 1,000-meter-tall body, and the battle scars on his body were quickly disappearing. The Vulcan orb seemed to have opened up a small passageway to the fire elemental plane in his chest, continuously pouring in fire energy. The Heart of Laws was also operating at full force, frantically compressing and tempering the fire energy. When they turned into streams of golden flames that surged out of the Heart of Laws, a powerful and majestic power of laws spread out. When the golden flames surged in his body, they converged into a powerful torrent of flames. The ancient power of laws that had existed since ancient times soared, filling every inch of Grimm's body. It even extended into the depths of his soul, completely transforming it. According to the world of gods, rank 4 was the highest rank a mortal could reach. If one took another step, they would inevitably touch the boundary between gods and humans. Once they took that step, they would become a god and enter the immortal realm. If they could not cross that boundary, they would forever be immortal. Sooner or later, their soul would collapse, their flesh would decay, and they would return to the plane cycle. In order to clearly distinguish the boundary between gods and humans, the peak of rank 4 was called a demigod, which was equivalent to taking one step into the immortal realm. Only by advancing to rank 5 could one truly become a god. According to the Magus world's past laws, only by advancing to the peak of rank 4 and using spells, battle techniques, or bloodlines to peek into the world's laws would one be able to repeatedly temper their body or soul and complete their own laws. Hence, to advance to rank 5 and complete the soul's laws, the basic requirement was to have 50 points of spiritual force and control a complete world's laws. Grimm's current situation was very strange. First of all, his spiritual force was only at 47 points. The battle just now had increased it by a little. He had not met the requirements to advance to rank 5. However, with the support of 2 rank 5 divine weapons and his fortuitous encounter, he had managed to refine the inextinguishable flames ahead of time. This was a complete and thorough fire of the laws of nature. And so, following the rules of the world, along with the plane's consciousness's reward for resisting the invasion of the Chaos Abyss, a type of rule modification that shouldn't have appeared within the plane naturally appeared. To put it bluntly, other pinnacle grade 4 elemental sorcerers would carefully clean the room before inviting their guests in. But he, on the other hand, had already recruited a tenant before the room was even built. After all, the law of fire was a world-class noble power. It was impossible for a mortal body to touch it. Thus, after Grimm transformed into his 1,000-meter-tall body, he engaged in a bloody battle with the abyssal fiend Mary. But now that the battle was over, he didn't dare to return to his human form. If he were to forcefully retreat, he would probably explode and die the moment he returned to his normal form. Without it, his human form would not be able to withstand the powerful and surging rule-bending power that he currently possessed. All he could do now was maintain his current state and try his best to transform his body and soul with the rule fire radiation, hoping to reach the point where he could accommodate and bear the rule force. Of course, this was a secret that only Grimm knew about. The other wizards had no idea about it all. On the contrary, seeing how Grimm easily maintained his 1,000-meter-long body and showed off his might to chase away the rank 5 abyssal fiend, all the Magi felt a sense of respect and fear. Once again, they felt dejected that they were no match for Grimm. Especially Monash. Gaia was the worst. The level 4 wizards carefully flew out of the wizard's pagoda and slowly approached Grimm. The other party's body was so huge that they didn't know how to get along with it. On one side was a 1,000-meter-tall giant, and on the other side was an ant-like magus. Were they supposed to lower their heads and lower their waists to converse with them? Fly in front of him? Would it be too offensive and anger the other party? From the beginning to the end, although many of the Tier 4 sorcerers knew they were not as strong as Grimm, they still treated him as their peers. Even if Grimm walked faster and was stronger, they were all level 4 sorcerers, and there was no difference in strength between them. However, at this moment, as they looked at Grimm, who was able to suppress them with just a trace of his aura for the first time in their lives, they felt that they were no match for him. Looking at Grimm, they felt as if they had returned to the apprehension and fear they felt when they first met an official wizard during their apprenticeship. It was a fear that came from the depths of their souls. It was the mentality of a low-level being showing weakness and trying to please a higher-level being. Knowing that they were no match for Grimm, no one would be stupid enough to step forward and die. Hence, fawning and being submissive became the only way for low-level sorcerers to protect themselves. And now, these veteran Tier 4 sorcerers, who had dominated the central continent for hundreds of years, were once again experiencing this long-awaited feeling for no reason. Seeing the many level 4 sorcerers hesitating in front of him, Grimm smiled and waved his hand, forming a 100-meter-wide fire cloud in front of him. He said in a deep voice, "All of you, stand up." The fire cloud floated at a height of Grimm's chest. This way, he did not have to lower his head, and the other party did not have to shout. It was more convenient for both sides. The level 4 sorcerers looked at each other, and finally, they hesitantly stepped onto the fire cloud. Grimm's fire cloud was like a ball of static fire. It was soft and flexible like a huge cotton ball when stepped on. However, the terrifying power of Grimm's law of fire had left a deep impression on everyone. Everyone who stepped on the fire cloud trembled with fear, afraid of being touched by the terrifying, inextinguishable fire. Perhaps only Mary did not have such a fearful attitude when facing Grimm. She flapped her wings and flew straight to Grimm's shoulder, walking back and forth curiously. From time to time, she would tug on Grimm's huge earlobe and caress his dark red and tough skin. She was like an overly enthusiastic baby, endlessly curious about everything. With a ready-made example like Mary, everyone's unfamiliarity and fear towards Grimm was finally alleviated. They all gathered together and bowed to him. Lord Grimm, could it be that you've reached the threshold of the law of fire and taken that step? Monash Gaia stepped forward and asked urgently. Among everyone present, he was the most concerned about this question. Hearing Gaia's question, Grimm calmly smiled and said, "You're only half right." Everyone nodded in understanding. Grimm was able to control such a powerful law of fire, so it was not wrong to say that he had grasped the law of fire. However, if he wanted to truly take that step, Grimm seemed to be lacking something. However, the others no longer cared about this. They had cast aside their competitive spirit and generously acknowledged Grimm's true status. The sudden appearance of such a powerful legendary fire wizard in the Central Continent would definitely be of great help to the current situation. Just the spatial rift alone was enough to make the sorcerer world's wizards tremble. If those powerful beings from other planes heard that there was a powerful sorcerer in the Central Continent of the sorcerer world who could suppress a rank 5 demon, would they still dare to come here without fear? And would the demon lords in the dark forest still dare to wreak havoc in the Central Continent? Just Grimm's presence alone was enough to intimidate the other 9 parties, and they would no longer dare to cast their eyes on the Central Continent. At this moment, the rank 4 magi of the Central Continent finally understood how fortunate it was to have a powerful magus supporting them. The first one to step forward was unexpectedly Matthew, the monkey-like wizard. "Lord Grimm, what do you think we should do from now on?" He had a flattering smile on his face, and his attitude was so humble that it was surprising. His sharpness had long since been defeated by the demon's fierceness. Coupled with the fact that he had lost his competitive spirit, it was easy to imagine that he could not wait to jump out and take a side. Although the other grade 4 wizards were also suppressed in their hearts, they still could not wipe away their dignity on the surface. The smile on Grimm's face did not change, but the glint in his huge black eyes became more relaxed. Although the grade 5 demon ran away, 3 of the remaining 4 demon lords still managed to escape into the Central Continent. You guys decide who is more suitable to carry out the purge. Everyone had seen it clearly. The moment the grade 5 demon was defeated, it had taken the succubus and escaped back to the abyss plane. The remaining 3 demon lords had been forced out of the great spatial crack's range by the shockwaves of the battle. Seeing that the situation was not good, they could only flee into the distance. If the 3 grade 4 demons were allowed to roam freely in the Central Continent, it would undoubtedly bring disaster to the wizard families along the way. Hence, it was only right to send people to hunt them down. Moreover, nobody dared to touch these grade 4 demons when the battle was not going smoothly. However, when victory was within their grasp, these grade 4 demons were basically top-grade resources and materials that were delivered to their doorstep. When many grade 4 wizards heard this, they could not help but lick their lips. They could not wait to kill these demons as soon as possible. Declan and Alfred exchanged glances. Just as they were about to step forward and volunteer, Matthew actually spoke up with a fawning smile. "My lord, you are now the number 1 wizard of the Central Continent. Everything will naturally be up to you. No matter what your orders are, I, Matthew, will be the first to express my support." Declan and Alfred could only stop themselves from taking that step forward. They could not help but curse inwardly. "What a bootlicker! That's fine as well." Grimm nodded. "It's just a few heavily injured demon lords. I won't take the credit. I'll stay here and seal up the great spatial crack. Mary will lead the team to hunt down the 3 demon lords. Matthew, Clara, Declan, Alfred, and Monash. Gaia, I'll have to trouble you to accompany them." Yes, a few of the magi who had been called showed joy on their faces. Chapter 1388. There were a total of 15 grade 4 magi in the Central Continent, but only 10 of them were present. This meant that there were still 5 grade 4 magi who had yet to join the battle. Glancing at the crowd, Grimm asked in a low voice, "Mirva, Mira, Ariza, Roderick, and Ashton, why aren't they here yet? Although his tone was light, there was a hint of reproach in his words. Alfred took a step forward and explained in a low voice, I notified Mirva before I came, but his Nimdar Academy seems to have run into some problems. They're currently at war with the underground world. That's why they couldn't come here. The underground world, Grimm muttered to himself. The underground world referred to a group of dark creatures living in the endless caves beneath the Magus continent. Although resources were scarce, food and population were scarce, they still maintained a complete biological system that was not disturbed by the outside world. To humans and magi on the surface, these subterranean creatures were a group of monsters that could not be reasoned with. Every once in a while, when the subterranean creatures had accumulated enough strength, they would rush out of the darkness and plunder the surface. It seemed that the eruption of the Mana Tide had agitated these subterranean creatures, making them think that the magi on the surface were in trouble, so they came out to take advantage of the situation. Nimdar Academy had many interactions with the subterranean world in the past, so it was not surprising that they were affected by the underground riots. Grimm nodded and asked, what about Mira and the other three? This time, it was Lord Alfred who answered. He shook his head and said, not long ago, a large number of monsters gathered in the Black Forest near Ariza's Manzo family. It's said that their numbers have reached tens of millions, and there are many grade 4 monster kings among them. That's why Mira and Roderick went to help. Tens of millions. That was probably the scale of a monster tide. It was no wonder that the heads of the Magi families were so busy that they did not have the time to care about the spatial rift. What about Ashton? I think I know a little about this. Clara stood up with a bitter smile. One of Ashton's secondary planes seems to have been invaded by a foreign race. They're fighting for control of the plane there. It had to be said that there were many rank 4 Magi in the central continent. Some were on good terms, while others were on bad terms. The relationship between them was very complicated. If Grimm did not have the ability to intimidate the sorcerers, he would have a hard time reconciling the conflicts between them. This world was truly filled with the flames of war, and the smoke of gunpowder filled the air. There was not a single piece of peaceful land in the center of the continent. Grimm's sword-like eyebrows gradually rose, and his black pupils were filled with a dark red luster. Finally, he raised his head and roared, I, Grimm, hereby swear that I will kill anyone who dares to invade the central continent during the demon tide. Scram! When he said the last word, Grimm's voice was like spring thunder, and he roared furiously. The word scram was like a bolt from the blue, reverberating through the clouds high up in the sky. The peerless might that was contained within his words swept out like a ripple, and it instantly shattered all the clouds in his field of vision. It caused the entire sky to suddenly clear up, and it revealed the blue sky. Grimm's words were sonorous and forceful, revealing his sharpness. Especially the last sentence, it was directly embedded in the laws of fire. With the help of the weak but clear rhythm of the laws of the world, it quickly spread to every corner of the Magus world. This was the first time Grimm had seen the world, and it was also the first time he had roared at the world. Of course, this kind of message could only be received by those who had reached a certain level and could touch the laws of the plane. As for the ordinary people of the Magus world, they had no right to hear Grimm's roar. The sky of the Magus world began to resound with muffled roars that sounded like thunder. However, if one closed their eyes and listened carefully, they would not be able to hear anything. Deeping Valley. An unprecedented battle was taking place near the exit of the valley. A large number of monsters that had been driven here by the disaster creatures rushed out of the mist, and they were fighting the wizards of the association who were guarding the area fearlessly. The sky was purplish-black. The ground was full of scars, and the corpses of the monsters were strewn all over the place. Those who were able to enter the sorcerer world were not good people. They were either huge in size with thick skin and strong impact, or they were petite and had unique racial abilities. No matter which one it would be fatal to the sorcerers of the association. Up until now, the Magus Association had lost more than 20 mid and high-level magi and hundreds of low-level magi in order to trap the monsters in the deep Ink Valley. Even so, they had not managed to repel the attacks of the Disaster Lords. As the battle dragged on, the number and level of the monsters and disaster creatures surging out from the depths of the deep Ink Valley increased rapidly. Every day, there would be terrifying level 3 and 4 monsters charging out and destroying the War Wizard Pagoda of the Association and attacking the Wizard Tower at the back. The War Wizard Pagoda at the edge of the valley, from being destroyed to being rebuilt, and from being rebuilt to being destroyed again. It had gone through more than 10 cycles of death. If not for the Magus Association's powerful strength and abundant resources, they would have been tortured to death by this torture. In order to prevent the Disaster Lords from attacking the Wizard Tower, the Magus Association tried hard to recall 3 of the 5 super experts and let them take turns guarding the front lines to prevent the collapse of the front lines. But today was the day that the super expert, Gria, was guarding the deep Ink Valley. On the chaotic battlefield filled with black smoke and continuous roars, Gria had just smashed the head of an armored violent bear with a punch. She was standing on top of its corpse and looking down at the battlefield. She suddenly raised her head and looked at the dark sky with a bewildered expression. Thunder rumbled, and a shocking roar echoed in the sky. All the monsters, disaster creatures, and high-level magi on the battlefield stopped what they were doing and turned their heads to the southwest. Most of the monsters and mid- and low-level magi were at a loss. They could vaguely feel that some strange change had occurred there, but they did not know the source or content of the change. Only disaster creatures and high-ranked magi could embed their minds into the laws of the plane and decipher the information contained within. Scram. It was just such a simple word, yet it contained a peerlessly violent and scorching will. Gria slowly savored it, and she vaguely felt a sense of familiarity. It's him. It's the wizard from the central continent. He could already pry open the world law. Damn bastard. The last time I fought with him, he could only touch the level of the world law. How could he be able to embed his will into the world law after only a few years of breaking up and use the power of the world law as his mouthpiece? This is too unbelievable, Gloria faintly thought. At this moment, a violent Tyrannosaurus that had obviously lost its sense of danger rushed over with earth-shattering steps. Gria, whose thoughts were interrupted, was instantly enraged. Her face, which was covered in purple light, flashed with a fierce expression. Her figure turned into a purple light and circled around the Tyrannosaurus. In the next second, blood spurted out of the grade 3 Tyrannosaurus body. 3 dragon heads, 1 big and 2 small, were severed. The Tyrannosaurus let out a mournful wail and fell to the ground, never to move again. Soon, the viscous blood that flowed out of its body formed a small lake below it. Its life force quickly dissipated with the wind. In a corner of the battlefield, a 5-meter-tall multi-armed giant turned its head to the side, sensing the strange information coming from afar. Although the scram was a little embarrassing, the multi-armed giant's expression gradually turned ugly when it sensed the other party's method of transmitting the information. The aura of laws. How could it be the aura of laws? Could it be that there were still powerhouses beyond Grade 4 in the Magus world? If this conjecture was true, then it would be dangerous for the Disaster Lords to invade the Sorcerer world. Their main bodies had Grade 5 or Grade 6 strength, but after entering the Magus world, they were all suppressed to the peak of Grade 4. Although they could rely on their valiant main bodies and unparalleled combat skills to have an advantage even when facing the super powerhouses of their own plane, their lives would be in danger if they encountered a super creature. Fortunately, the other party seemed to be in the central part of the continent, which was thousands of miles away from the eastern part of the continent they were attacking. This way, the chances of encountering this fellow would be much lower. Looks like I'll have to find the 5 faces to discuss the follow-up attack. Since the central part of the continent has a super creature guarding it, it's best not to provoke them. Having thought this through, the multi-armed giant waved its hand and ordered the disaster creatures beside it to continue attacking, while it turned around and burrowed back into the depths of the valley. The entire battlefield erupted into a bloody battle once more. Silver Alliance, Prophet's Tower. The cloth-robed Tower Master was still standing on the narrow and dangerous platform in the sky. He silently spread his arms, listening to the voice from the plane of laws while muttering in a crazed and intoxicated manner. A controller of laws. I didn't think that the Magus world would have another controller of laws. Judging from his performance, I'm afraid he'll become a new great sorcerer in another 100 years. A great sorcerer, a great sorcerer. That's a terrifying powerhouse that transcends the boundaries of the plane and can run amok in the multiverse. Listen, everyone listen. This is the first roar of a controller of laws to this world. How beautiful, how intoxicating. This is the pinnacle that a creature of the plane can reach. In every corner of the Prophet's Tower, all the secret scroll scholars put down their quills and raised their tired and despondent faces, silently listening to the voice from the distant plane. Chapter 1389. The Dark Forest. This was a vast forest located deep within the Dark Forest. The dense sea of trees spanning 5 miles of the Dark Forest was packed densely with these powerful magical creatures that usually occupied various places and dominated the area. Outside of them, there were also ordinary forest beasts and birds of prey that outnumbered the monsters by 100 times, as well as countless herbivores, insects, and small spiders. The variety of them far exceeded the imagination of outsiders. From the wind eagles, gale eagles, chimeras, and wyverns that flew in the sky, to the razor boars, armored rhinos, berserk baboons, and violent earth bears that ran on the ground, to the strange purple worms, blood-sucking spider monsters, Fermi ants, and even the extinct owl bears, shark lizard beasts, and griffins. It could be said that all the magical creatures that could be described in the Encyclopedia of Magical Creatures could be found here, and there were even many mutated species that were not recorded in the encyclopedia. Today, even if a sorcerer or scholar who was proficient in magical creatures was present, it would be difficult to identify their races, origins, and types. Usually, these fellows hid in various parts of the Dark Forest, with their own fixed living and hunting areas. They rarely traveled long distances and intruded into the territory of other creatures. But today, under the restraint of strange force, they suppressed their instincts and the urge to hunt. They lay quietly in the forest, waiting for the orders of the forest kings. In the center of the forest, surrounded by many monsters, 3 forest kings of different shapes and sizes, with wild and violent auras, gathered together to discuss the upcoming attack. In the southeast corner of this small camp, a large group of harpy witches were entrenched together. The harpy witches were a large magical creature kingdom in the Dark Forest. Most of their members had gray bird feathers and looked ugly and ferocious. They had more bird-like characteristics than humans. Only the mutated individuals would shed the feathers on their torso, leaving only some bluebird feathers on their joints, armpits, and the ends of some limbs. The harpy witches present today were obviously the cream of the crop in the kingdom. Their exposed skin was white and delicate, their bodies were slender, their breasts were full, and their faces were strangely exquisite and perfect. The only remaining characteristics of their race were their crimson eyes, sharp, curved claws, and blue wings on their backs. As spellcasters who had awakened the power of the elements, most harpy witches were surrounded by eye-catching wind and lightning elements. When such a large group of spellcasters gathered together, their overwhelming magical aura could even cause the magical energy of the Dark Forest to resonate with them. Moreover, they clustered around a beautiful woman who wore a fiery red feathered robe and revealed an elegant and noble bearing. Her figure was unusually tall and slender, and her appearance was also extremely alluring. Her appearance alone would cause quite a commotion in the mortal world. However, the purple eyes with thick black eyeshadow flashed with a madness and cruelty unique to wild magical beasts. More importantly, this beautiful woman, who was a combination of the feminine charm of a human and the cruel characteristics of a monster, wore a small and exquisite crystal crown on her head. She was actually a harpy empress with the strength of a grade 4 intermediate. Logically speaking, Harpy Queen Phyloxy didn't have the qualifications to be the king of the Dark Forest. But considering the large number of spellcasters in the Harpy Witch's kingdom and the shocking number of combatants in their tribe, there was a place for her among the 3 kings of the forest. On the east side of the camp, there was a jellyfish-like flocculent floating alone. Its size was about the same as a rhinoceros. It floated in the air 10 meters above the ground, dragging thousands of strange, silk-like tentacles behind it. The jellyfish-like monster's body was translucent and filled with a light blue viscous liquid. In the dark forest, it would occasionally emit strange light waves that would make one dizzy. This monster was facing off against the other 2 kings of the forest by itself, and it didn't seem to be at a disadvantage in terms of aura. Even when the Harpy Empress Phyloxy's gaze landed on his strange and demonic body, a trace of fear and vigilance could be seen on her face. As for the 3rd king of the forest, it was a huge war bear covered in white fur. It was 5 meters tall, but it squatted on a tree stump like a human. It had its legs crossed and a huge pipe in its mouth, puffing out clouds of smoke with a smile on its face. On its body, there was a set of simple and crude metal armor that only covered its chest, back, and ribs. The rest of its body was still exposed. On its head, there was a metal helmet that was buckled at a slanted angle. Looking at its sturdy appearance, it seemed to have been forged from meteoric iron, a specialty of the Dark Forest. The 3 kings were undeniably powerful kings of the western regions of the Dark Forest. In their respective regions, they were overlords of the forest that no one dared to provoke. And now, under the allure of the magic tide, they had finally gathered here and began to discuss how to launch an official attack on the human settlements. The Silent Forest was already at the edge of the western regions of the Dark Forest. Less than 100 miles to the east, one would be able to enter the human territory of the central region of the Wizard Continent. It was said that the human wizards had already built a tall wizard's pagoda at the edge of the forest to guard against their attacks, as well as a dozen war wizard pagodas. Faced with such a situation, the 3 kings of the western regions did not look worried or afraid. Instead, they began to discuss how to split the spoils of war after breaking through the wizard's line of defense. Wizards? We only want wizards. Harpy Queen Phyloxy slammed the crystal staff in her hand and said sternly with her strange purple eyes, "You'd better be gentler in battle. Don't kill all the human wizards. What we need are living magi. The stronger the better. If you can capture a living magus, we can use the dark crystal and Garuda fruit to exchange for it. The Garuda fruits are good stuff. I still haven't forgotten that sweet taste." The white war bear revealed a human-like expression of gluttony. It puffed out a thick smoke ring and said, "Don't worry, I'll try not to use too much strength when I meet those human wizards. But I want all the magical crystals of the human wizards. If anyone dares to fight with me, don't blame my fist for not recognizing who you are. That's good too. Phyloxy wants human wizards, you want magical crystals, and I want human souls. This way, we won't have to fight each other. Everyone will be happy." The jellyfish-like magical creature did not have a mouth, and was communicating with the other 2 using the mental language. "Since it's decided, let's start the attack." The white war bear put away its pipe and stood up like a human. It roared, "These little brats have been cooped up here for too long. Once they become violent, I'm afraid the entire beast tide will be in chaos." "All right, then." The jellyfish-like magical creature stopped abruptly halfway through its sentence. It turned its head slightly, and the thousands of strands of flesh attached to its body raised at the same time, pointing toward the northeast horizon. There, an inexplicable rumble of thunder could be heard. This was a strange undulation that originated from the laws of the world. Normal creatures would not be able to detect it. Only powerhouses like them, whose strength had touched upon the laws of the world, had the right to embed their spiritual force into the illusory laws of the world and read the correct information from within. However, the moment their spiritual force entered the void and touched upon the laws of the world, the word scram filled with a scorching and violent aura, suddenly rushed into their minds. Harpy Empress Phyloxy was caught off guard, and she let out a cry before spitting out a mouthful of blood. Her fiery red feathered robe was instantly ignited with wisps of flames, as if she had turned into a sea of fire and was about to combust. The harpy witches around her screamed, either pouncing over to protect her or soaring into the sky to search for the strange ambusher. The rest gathered the power of wind and quickly suppressed the strange flames on Phyloxy's body. "Don't touch those flames. Disperse." Her subordinates did not know what was good for them, but Phyloxy was able to sense the terror of the golden flames with her sharp senses. She threw off her most treasured fiery red feathered robe, turned around, and fled 100 meters away in a flash. When the power of wind from her subordinates collided with the burning robe, it instantly exploded into a huge ball of flames. The three harpy witches who could not dodge in time were caught in the flames, their bodies and hair starting to burn. However, no matter how much they tried to attack and wash away the flames with their magic, it was to no avail. Instead, the magic they gathered became nourishment for the golden flames, and the ball of flames grew larger and more ferocious. The three grade 2 bird and snake witches were burnt to death by the golden flames in just a dozen or so moves, turning into black ashes that scattered in the wind. Only then did the other harpy witches realize how terrifying the golden flames were. They did not dare to add fuel to the flames, and they all fled far away from the flames. While Phyloxy suffered a huge loss, the white war bear did not gain an advantage either. Its skin was thick, and it could easily withstand the burning intent that invaded its body through the laws of nature. It stood up on its hind legs and heavily patted its chest. A scarlet stream of flames gushed out from its nostrils, instantly turning the grass in front of it into ashes. However, how could the inextinguishable flame be so easily dispelled? The white war bear raised its broad and majestic right paw, staring blankly at the tiny flame burning in its palm. It had already tried many times and used all kinds of methods and means, but it was still unable to annihilate this seemingly weak little flame that could be extinguished with a single blow. It could not use magic energy. Using magic energy was like adding oil to a flame. It would only make it grow stronger. But if it did not use magic energy, was it supposed to extinguish it with its bare hands? The white war bear extended 2 thick claws from its left paw and accurately pinched the center of the flame. After a while, it loosened its claws, but the little flame was still burning quietly. Chapter 1390. Baster, what's going on? The white war bear could no longer maintain its calm and roared. Why are we being attacked by the power of laws? The jellyfish-like monster was the only one among the 3 kings to escape unscathed. It promptly put up a transparent barrier of light, preventing the scorching will from penetrating it. Without the guidance of the scorching will, the inextinguishable flame degenerated into an ordinary demonic fire and was easily extinguished by a few freezing rays. It did not pay attention to the chaos of its 2 companions. Instead, it gazed into the distance, silently feeling the slight but distinct undulations of the world's laws. After a long time, it suddenly sighed and said dejectedly, "I'm withdrawing from this attack plan." "What did you say, old monster? Are you kidding me? You were the one who initiated this operation, and we came here at your invitation." The other 2 immediately began to shout. Although the attack just now had made them extremely fearful, it was still a little too cautious to give up an operation that could bring huge benefits to the tribe or themselves. This jellyfish-like monster was obviously the oldest in the western region of the Black Forest, and its qualifications were undoubtedly the oldest. It abruptly turned its body and solemnly warned the 2 young kings using spiritual language. "Don't ever forget that this is the world of magi. We'll take advantage of the eruption of the demon wave, and the magi are distracted to attack the human territories and plunder some necessary resources. As long as we don't go overboard, those so-called high-ranked magi will turn a blind eye and not cause trouble for us. But once a king appears among them, in order to maintain his reputation and glory, he will instead be more radical and aggressive than usual. If we provoke him now, I'm afraid that our western territories will be in big trouble. After listening to the jellyfish-like monster's sincere warning, the two newly risen kings of the western regions could not help but frown, somewhat unable to make up their minds. This was a rare opportunity. The Black Forest of the Magus continent could be roughly divided into 4 regions: north, south, east, west, and south, due to its vast terrain and the separation of several large human settlements. Every region had its own powerful magical creatures. They would usually become the kings of the region, ruling over the vast forests that spanned millions of miles. The dark forest of the western regions was sandwiched between the center of the continent and the Silver Alliance. It had experienced repeated purges and purges by the Magi. As a result, there were very few powerful monsters above grade 4, and the number of monsters that could become the king of a region could be counted on one hand. Under such circumstances, taking advantage of the magic wave to plunder a batch of rare resources from the wizard's territory was also an opportunity for the monsters to secretly develop and grow stronger. If they gave up on this opportunity, it would be impossible for the demon race to develop explosively. After all, magical beasts lacked the systematic power system, alchemy system, inheritance system, and trade system that wizards had. All the resources needed to evolve in a lifetime had to be dug out from the Dark Forest bit by bit. This was simply too difficult for the Dark Forest system that did not have a complete industrial and commercial system. What level has this Magus that appeared out of nowhere reached? Harpy Empress Philoxy asked in a low voice. This was a crucial question. If the other party was only a peak grade 4 super expert, the 3 of them would have a chance against him. If they could lure him to a few danger zones in the Dark Forest, it would not be impossible to kill him. The jellyfish monster said coldly, "From the aura of laws that I can sense, that fellow's strength is clearly above that of a super expert. From a certain point of view, we have to treat him as a grade 5 Magus. How is this possible? Isn't the limit of strength in this world the peak of grade 4? Why is there an exception like this?" Harpy Empress Philoxy could not help but let out an ear-piercing shriek. The white warbear's face revealed a look of fear and vexation. This is bad. Now, my litter of cubs won't have any magic crystals left. I'm afraid not many of them will be able to grow up successfully. He has already marked the central region as his territory. If you want to anger a super Magus, go ahead and try. I won't participate in any case. The jellyfish monster snorted coldly. The reason I can live for so long is because I can endure. In the world of Magi, you want to fight against a super Magus? Are you tired of living? With that, it turned around and floated into the depths of the forest. Its translucent, viscous body flickered with a strange blue light, quickly becoming faintly discernible and disappearing into the boundless sea of trees. The white war bear stared at it with its mouth agape, a string of angry curses coming out of its mouth. However, it did not give the order to attack in the end. Just as the white war bear was about to leave in frustration, the Harpy Empress Philoxy flapped her blue wings and flew over. "Burn, don't tell me you're giving up too. What, you still want to attack?" The white war bear Burn retorted angrily. "We definitely can't go to the central region, but we might have a chance in the other regions." The Harpy Empress Philoxy said with a glib tongue, "Don't forget, our western region is connected to the Silver Alliance. While those fellows from the southern region are attacking the Silver Alliance, we can only bring some of our trusted subordinates there. We might have a chance to get a share of the loot." Hearing Philoxy's suggestion, the white war bear Burn hesitated. "That's the war zone those bastards from the southern region have set up. Won't we attract their vengeance if we join in the fun? You want the spoils of war, but you're still afraid of this and that. How can you strengthen your family like this?" Philoxy curled her lips and mocked. "If you miss out on the mana tide, you won't have enough magic crystals to catalyze it. How will your tribe grow stronger with time? It's up to you whether you dare to take the risk." The white war bear Burn was a bold fellow and made up his mind in an instant. "All right, count me in. I'll go back and make some simple arrangements, then meet up with you in the west. As for the little fellows that have gathered here, let them do as they please. As long as we don't show ourselves, those magi won't have a reason to cause trouble for us." After a simple discussion, the two kings of the forest left the camp one after another. Before they left, under their orders, the huge beast tide that had gathered in the surrounding dark forest for tens of thousands of miles finally rushed out of the forest, sweeping towards the nearest human territory. However, the middle and high-ranked magical beasts could no longer be seen in the majestic beast tide and magic hordes. This undoubtedly caused the mana tide to become chaotic and disorderly. Correspondingly, the lethality of the mana tide began to plummet, becoming less unstoppable. Spatial rift. This was the first time Grimm had used the power of laws to broadcast to the plane, and the accumulated anger and hatred in his chest had finally been alleviated. He stood quietly at the edge of the rift, using his own burning domain to erase the aura of the abyss that lingered on the ground. This was the power of laws that came from another huge plane. Every strand of it contained the cruel, tyrannical, chaotic, and evil will and power of the abyss. What he needed to do now was to use his own flames to neutralize this aura of the abyss, and then wait for the Magus World's laws to regain control of this place. If he did not do this, the Magus World's consciousness would have regained control of this place sooner or later without the help of powerful demons. However, with him as a helper, the abyssal demons have been chased away and the abyss will have been expelled. This made it much easier for the Magus World's consciousness to regain control of this place. Hence, Grimm could feel waves of pure life force entering his soul every time he regained control of the plane. And this was obviously a little reward from the plane's consciousness to him for setting things right. While this reward was so small that it was hard to detect, as he completed his purification step by step, the trickling life force condensed in his soul, causing his spiritual force to increase slightly. More importantly, it purified and purified Grimm's soul, allowing him to feel the warmth of a mother's womb, as well as an incomparable sense of ease and satisfaction. In the depths of his mind, the A.I. chip's prompts never stopped ringing. Detected the integration of high-purity life essence. Estimated to have a small boost to the host spirit. Detected the integration of high-purity life essence. Estimated to have a small boost to the host spirit. Due to the frequency of the prompts, Grimm subconsciously treated them as background music. He only focused on the 3D character model in the depths of his mind. With the influx of the feedback from the plane, all of Grimm's body's vitals improved slightly. Even the red band of light that represented his affinity with fire was undergoing a strange change. There was originally only a trace of gold at the top of the band, but it gradually extended downwards, showing signs of fusing into one. Grimm had forcefully changed his bloodline, jumping from being a pure elemental magus to a path that balanced both the elements and bloodlines. This huge change also filled his soul with some hidden injuries that were hard to detect. But now, with the nourishment of the purest life force, these hidden injuries in his soul were slowly healing. The bloodline of the devouring devilfish that he had just fused with was also growing stronger happily. Only now did Grimm understand why so many magi were willing to please the plane's consciousness, even going so far as to harm their families in order to act on behalf of the heavens. Chapter 1391. When he was weak, he probably hoped to become strong at every moment. But now that Grimm had become stronger, he realized that being strong had its drawbacks. He did not dare to act rashly now. The transformation of his body of laws had only just begun, and he was far from being mature. But from this moment onwards, he had lost the right to do as he pleased. The closer he was to the laws, the clearer he could sense the existence of the world's laws and the attention of the plane's consciousness. Right now, he felt like he was in a house filled with exquisite porcelain and glass products. Even the slightest disturbance could bring about a destructive disaster to the area he was in. After all, his short battle with the Abyssal Fiend had been a gimmick of resisting an invasion. Even if he caused great damage to the space around the Great Spatial Crack, the Abyssal Fiend would be the one to blame. All he needed to do was enjoy the plane feedback in peace. But now that the enemy was gone, his every move attracted the attention of the plane's consciousness. Although the plane world was not as weak as outsiders thought, when faced with a powerful individual who had grasped a certain world law and could penetrate his will into the level of the world law to influence the entire plane space, the plane consciousness also closely monitored him, as if he were a criminal. Grim and the plane's consciousness were still in the honeymoon period. After repelling the Abyss's attack, the plane's consciousness was not stingy and directly transmitted a considerable amount of plane feedback. This plane feedback could be seen as a reward from the plane's consciousness, as well as a form of intimacy. As long as the plane feedback was not used up, Grim would always be favored and treated with respect by the plane's consciousness. But if Grim did anything to harm the sorcerer world, this intimacy would be the first to be consumed. As long as the intimacy was not used up, the plane's consciousness would tolerate him and try its best to appease him. But once the intimacy was used up, the plane's consciousness would probably turn hostile and use all possible methods to expel him from the sorcerer world. The operation of a plane required the support of a system of laws. With a big mouse like Grim, who could affect the power of laws, hindering the plane's consciousness would naturally be displeased. If this big rat knew what was going on and restrained itself, then the plane's consciousness might tolerate its existence within a certain limit. However, if this large rat were to affect the operation of the plane unscrupulously, then that would be the moment when the plane's consciousness shed all pretense of cordiality and swore to expel the large rat from the plane system. It was that simple. From ancient times until now, many super-ranked sorcerers have been forced to leave the sorcerer world for this reason, looking for a new place to settle down outside the sorcerer world. And now, after Grim truly grasped the inextinguishable flames, he was immediately faced with the same problem. His existence was too heaven-defying for this world. Looks like I'll have to restrain myself from now on. Grim could not help but sigh to himself as he began to seal the spatial rift. As he chanted in a loud voice that shook the entire universe, a series of huge flame runes appeared out of thin air and continuously merged into the spatial rift. Under the stimulation and restriction of the flame runes, the spatial rift became smaller and smaller, finally shrinking into a dense door of light with a diameter of less than 100 meters. After all, Grim was not a specialized sealer. It was already commendable for him to be able to compress such a large spatial rift to a size of 100 meters. With such a small door of light, it would be difficult for high-level magical creatures above level 4 to pass through. If the creatures that entered the sorcerer world were below level 4, then the high-grade sorcerers and the wizard's pagoda would be able to deal with them easily. With Grim here, the Alden family's sorcerers became unprecedentedly active. They rode flying wizard beasts and circled the door of light, continuously testing something. Below the door of light, more sorcerers gathered and began to build war wizards' pagodas and various other sorcery facilities. While they were busy, they could not help but look up at this powerful sorcerer who was thousands of meters tall and looked like an ancient giant. Such a powerful force was probably the limit of what the plane could contain. In front of such a powerful sorcerer, mid-grade level 2 and 3 sorcerers like them were as weak as ants. They would not be able to withstand a single slap from Grim. The closer they got to Grim, the more they could feel the difference in power between them. If Grim, who had turned into a giant, relaxed the restriction on the flame energy in his body, he could instantly turn everything within 1,000 meters into ashes, much less fight. Low-level 1 and 2 sorcerers would instantly turn into ashes under such a high temperature. Sorcerers above level 3 might struggle a little longer, but they would not be able to escape the radiation zone alive. Furthermore, Grim's burning domain contained a terrifying law of fire. Even if some sorcerers used sorcery techniques to reincarnate in other regions or transfer their souls, they would not be able to escape the burning of the law of fire. Unless they could change the energy of their souls or escape to another plane in time, they would be able to use the space barrier to block Grimm's law of fire. Otherwise, all methods would be ineffective against the law of fire, and they would not be able to escape death. The only thing that could resist the law of fire was another law. After sealing the space crack, Grimm handed the remaining work to the ant-like sorcerers below him. He stood there quietly, using the law of fire in his heart of law to modify his body. Days passed by quickly like this. Many war wizard towers were erected once again, guarding the only remaining light gate in the great spatial fissure. Grimm had only completed 26% of the transformation of the laws in his body. On this day, just as he finished meditating and was about to think about what he should do today, a strange spiritual wave gently touched his senses. Beep. Received a long-distance communication request from Lich Kongness. Would you like to accept? Kongness? Grimm's brows twitched, but he chose to accept. In the next second, a chilling spiritual force connected to his senses. Lord Grimm, you've done us in. The moment his thoughts connected, Kongness started complaining and complaining crazily. As a fair trade, you hid the truth about the necropolis of the god of death and caused us great losses. I represent the alliance of liches in the universe to issue you a stern warning and protest. You? Huh? Why is your mind so strange? Stop. Grimm interrupted Kongness. Kongness, we made it clear when we made our deal. I only gave you a spatial waymark leading to the necropolis of the god of death. I don't know much about the situation there. So, I need to ask you, did you find the target according to the waymark I gave you? We found it, but is the target a necropolis of the god of death? Grimm interrupted him again. Yes, but the Lich had obviously just come back from a big rebuff and was full of resentment and wanted a vent. There are no buts. Our deal is for you to fight for me once, and I'll give you a spatial waymark leading to the necropolis of the god of death. It's that simple. As for whether you can find anything there or whether there's a trap inside, that's not part of our deal. I don't think it's right for you to come here and demand an explanation. Is it? Ugh, the Lich Khan genus froze. As a qualified Lich, he was naturally interested in the necropolis of the god of death. If he could successfully excavate a necropolis of the god of death, divine crystals would be out of the question. However, the remains of the god of death and the divinity of the god of death would definitely make a Lich rich in an instant. If he used some tricks, he might even be able to control the remains of the god of death and take over the remaining worshippers and power of faith. However, exploring a necropolis of the god of death was no doubt a huge risk. Some gods of death would even create a fake necropolis of the god of death and place a clone in it, waiting for powerful beings from other planes to come to their deaths. Or perhaps the god of death hadn't exhausted his power of faith and was only in a temporary slumber. That way, the so-called necropolis of the god of death would become a trap for the god of death. Anyone who stepped into it would suffer. If the gravedigger didn't get anything out of it, he might even lose his life to the owner of the necropolis. That was why Kongness knew he couldn't take everything for himself after receiving Grimm's vague message and the spatial waymark. So he gathered a few volunteers from the Lich's League to explore the necropolis with him. There were 5 grade, 4 Liches, and their endless army of undead. That was a terrifying force that could overturn seas and rivers in any other plane. Unfortunately, such a powerful force still failed miserably in the graveyard of the death god, and they suffered a huge setback. Kongness refused to divulge the details of the exploration and battle. Even so, the outcome alone was enough to deduce how terrifying the battle was. Of the 5 grade, 4 Liches that entered the necropolis of the god of death, only 3 managed to escape alive. The remaining 2 had their bodies destroyed by their enemies. One of them was lucky enough to escape and return to his phylactery to be reborn. The unluckiest one had his soul harvested by the despicable god of death and became nourishment for the god of death. Naturally, the Lich's League was shaken by the god of death. A few of the most senior liches showed themselves and swore to hunt down the despicable god of death to the end. In comparison, Congnus, the young lich who provided the wrong information, was the subject of much criticism. Chapter 1392. What's going on with you? At first, Congnus was only concerned with scolding Grim, but with the sharp senses of a high-order lich, he quickly sensed the abnormality in Grim's soul ripples. Why do I sense the power of laws? Have you already pushed the law of fire to the level of laws? Congnus's spiritual waves were loud and agitated, a stark contrast to his usual cold and sinister self. He was clearly shocked by the reality before him. The last time he met Grim was half a year ago. That was only a short period of time for them to take a nap or go out for a stroll. How could such a small amount of time allow him to undergo such a drastic change? But now, Congnus's knowledge was completely overturned by Grim's terrifying rate of advancement. He could actually smell the strong scent of laws on Grim's body. Naturally, he knew what this meant for a Tier 4 sorcerer. That was why it couldn't wait to ask the question. It wanted to know the terrifying answer as soon as possible. How should I put it? I'm in a complicated state right now, Grim said. To be more precise, I'm a half-evolved one. Half-evolved? Even the Tier 4 lich was dazed by Grim's actions. He simply could not understand what a semi-advanced tier was. If he advanced, then he advanced. If he didn't advance, then he didn't advance. What was half-advanced? It's simple. I've grasped the type of law of fire, but my spiritual force hasn't reached the required level yet. That's why I'm stuck on the path to evolution. Grasp the law of fire. Spiritual force, not up to the required level. Congnus couldn't help but mutter. The more he thought about it, the crazier and more shocked he became. How did something like that happen? Spiritual force, not up to the required level, meant it hadn't reached the upper limit of 50 points. In that case, how did Grim squeeze out the law of fire and purify it into the law of fire? Could it be the divine Vulcan Pearl? With a high-grade divine weapon that was completely compatible with his soul, could he really refine the power of laws and reach the level of laws? At the thought of that, Congnus's heart, which had been silent for millennia, started to beat again. After all, it also possessed a high-grade divine artifact that was compatible with the origin of the soul. The austere winter box had both the death and cold rules. If he could fuse it with his soul, the power he could unleash would definitely be above that of the legendary fire wizard's fire god bead. Ever since Congnus obtained the austere chest, he had become a powerful demigod lich. If he could obtain a method to temper his law power from Grim, he might even become a Tier 5 great lich. At that time, with the chest of austere winter, it could become a powerhouse in the entire pan-universe grand alliance of liches and demons. The title of a lich was different from that of a wizard. Rank 3 and Rank 4 liches were collectively known as liches. Rank 4 liches were known as demigod liches. Rank 5 liches were known as great liches or god liches. Rank 6 liches were known as lich elders, and rank 7 and above were known as lich kings. To be honest, the highest ranked lich in the multiverse was the Lich King at rank 7. A higher level lich had yet to appear. Where are you now? I'll go look for you immediately. Congnus could not help but feel restless at the thought of this. As for the grudge between him and the necropolis of the god of death, it became worthless in the face of something as important as ascending. XXXXX, XXXXX. Grim transmitted the coordinates of the sealed, great dimensional crack to Congnus. A moment later, the sealed gate of light shrunk to 100 meters wide ripple in space. A crystal skeleton draped in a luxurious magic robe emerged from within and descended into the Magus world. Enemy, prepare to attack. Be careful. It looks like a lich. The Arden family's magi, who were circling around the Gate of Light on their flying beasts, raised their elemental shields and took out their high-grade magic wands. They were ready for battle. Stand down, all of you. It's my guest. Grim's gentle voice echoed in the sky. Hearing this, all the sorcerers hurriedly retracted the spell radiance in their hands and stopped chanting their spells, retreating into the distance. The Lich Kongnas, who had rushed over in a hurry, raised his head and saw the 1,000-meter-tall Grim. It opened its mouth silently, grinning so wide that the short staff in its hand almost fell from the sky. It looked around for a long time before it cautiously floated up and flew in front of Grim. It said in surprise, "No wonder you said that your condition is abnormal. It is indeed shocking. Sorry for the embarrassment." Grim chuckled. "Something went wrong during the upgrade, so I can only stay in this giant form for now. Fortunately, I didn't lose much in terms of combat power. Can I see what kind of law of fire you've mastered?" Kongnas rubbed his hands together. Grim was a demigod lich, so there was no way he would covet the law of fire. Therefore, Grim did not hide anything. He raised his right hand that was as big as a hill and raised his index finger. In the next second, a small cluster of golden flames floated up. Any high-order Magus exclusive spells were their secret weapons. They would not show it to others easily. Only friends like them, who had no direct conflict of interest, would be so generous and pure. Kongnas did not try to probe the flames with his spiritual force. Instead, he silently sensed the characteristics of the laws of fire. The small cluster of flames did not look like much, but as it burned on Grim's fingertip, it caused the laws of the world to tremble violently. At the level of the world's laws invisible to the naked eye, other than the nomological power of the flame law, all other nomological powers were vaguely repelled. This meant that when Grim used the law of fire, the laws of the world would be temporarily rewritten. Apart from the power of fire, Grim's enemies would not be able to obtain any elemental or law power from the laws of the world. This was the most terrifying thing about magi of laws being superior to magi of elemental laws. They could sever the connection between their enemies and the planar system. Without the connection of the planar system, it was impossible to fight against a magus of laws who had an endless supply of mana with their own strength and spells. Apart from the power of laws, the legendary fire shaman's flames also had a terrifying life-locking property. Once Grim's law of fire invaded someone's soul, the power of the law would seep into their soul and use their life force as fuel to burn for eternity. Such a vicious law of fire would not rest until one was dead. Without another law of equal power to counteract the law of fire, no one would be able to escape death. Even though he was already a demigod lich and had the austere chest with him, the golden flames in Grim's hand still made him feel an instinctive sense of respect from the depths of his soul. This was the suppression of laws, the suppression of power, and the suppression of strength. Ever since he obtained the austere chest, Kongnas had become cold and aloof. In its eyes, there were very few opponents of the same level that could compare to it. Even those so-called super powerhouses were divided into different levels in its eyes. Trash like Savorius wouldn't be a match for Kongnas even if there were a dozen of them. Only powerful beings like Gria, who had trained in the outer world, had the right to fight him. But now, facing the human magus that was once so insignificant, Kongnas felt a little lost and depressed. This was the power of laws. This was pure, unadulterated power of laws. He thought he was talented enough to become a demigod lich after becoming a demigod lich from a normal lich. How could he have known that the inconspicuous Grim had already locked onto the path to Tier 5 and became a magus of laws even stronger than him? For some reason, Kongnas found it hard to control his emotions at the thought. However, as a cunning lich, he wouldn't reveal his true feelings. Besides, the only thing left of its face was its crystal skull. What kind of creature in the world could tell the changes in its emotions from its white and cold bones? "Let's work together," Kongnas suddenly said. Since Kongnas was so powerful, he had to pull him into his camp. "We've always been allies," Grim said. "What? Are you going to forget about our previous promise?" It was only then that Kongnas remembered he had made a verbal promise to serve him for 200 years. But in the past decade or so, he had only focused on fusing with the austere chest and sent a few high-order subordinates to the Horton Witchcraft Academy. Now that he thought about it, he was actually one of Grim's subordinates. In the past, the demigod lich Tsongonis would have looked down on his status and even forced Grim to change his promise. But now, Grim had become an expert of a higher rank and power than him, making Kongnas the weaker of the two. His identity as Grim's servant would become a reality. Chapter 1393. But we're still friends, aren't we? Grim said in a sincere tone. Friends. Congenus was speechless. Anyone who dared to be friends with a demigod lich was definitely not in their right mind. After all, liches were terrifying and merciless. Everyone in the multiverse knew how terrifying they were. That was why Congenus felt extremely uncomfortable with Grim's friendliness. You've seen my current situation. I've already taken half a step forward. Even though I haven't been completely rejected by the Magus world, I don't have much time left in the plane. Grim smiled as he explained, once I leave the Magus world and head to the outer regions, I'll be all alone once more. I'm afraid I'll need your help with many things, my friend. While Grim didn't say it outright, it was obvious how much he valued Congenus. Congenus was already a demigod lich. With the Winter Casket, he would have no problem becoming a Grand Lich. Although Grim had left half a step earlier than him, in terms of individual combat ability, Grim was not much inferior to him. That was why he had to plan ahead and get on good terms with the Lich that was destined to rise. That way, Grim wouldn't be in the dark when he came to the Outlands. He wouldn't be without a partner to help him. Strength, influence, connections, resources, those were all essential factors for a great Magus to grow. Not a single one could be left out. Congenus's doubts were immediately dispelled the moment he returned to the old path of balancing benefits. He even felt a sense of selfishness. Grim needed a strong ally as external aid, and Congenus needed the same. Once he reached the 5th step and became a divine Great Lich, he would have the right to raise his own banner in the Liches Union and recruit some unlucky liches to help him. It should be known that in most spellcasters' organizations, they had always discriminated against and rejected liches who violated the cycle of life and broke the boundary between life and death. There were even many orthodox spellcasters who loathed and hated liches. Once they were discovered, they would definitely get rid of them. As a result, the low-ranked members of the Liches Union could only hide like rats in the sewers. They couldn't openly call themselves spellcasters, and it was difficult for them to obtain the necessary resources and knowledge. Congenus, on the other hand, had made a name for himself. He only managed to get through that difficult period with his powerful foundation. However, even so, it was still difficult for it to find a suitable trading partner for many high-level knowledge and rare resources. After all, the sinister image of liches was too deeply ingrained in people's hearts. Not many spellcaster organizations were willing to deal with them. Conversely, if Congenus had a powerful legendary fire magus as a partner, he might be able to open a path to becoming a magus. That way, it would be much easier for him to obtain knowledge and resources. With resources and strength, it would no longer be a dream to form a force of their own in the Lich Alliance. As for the necropolis of the God of Death, it had helped the great Lich Alliance rope in a future powerful wizard. So what if they lost a little lich? The moment he thought of that, his attitude changed drastically and he became much closer to Grim. Congenus and Congenus were both loners in their own tribes and had few partners. Now that they had a common goal, they instantly formed an alliance and became good partners with stable interests. Now that they had a common goal, they instantly formed an offensive and defensive alliance and became a good partner with stable interests and demands. Congenus made up his mind to set up a magic lab near the spatial fissure in the near future to study Grim's progress. He made up his mind to set up a laboratory near the spatial fissure in the near future so he could study Grim's progress. In return, he would give Grim the secrets of the endless void he had gathered so that he could familiarize himself with the outside world as soon as possible. It was a fair deal for both sides to take what they needed. After appeasing the demigod Lich, Grim scanned his surroundings. These days, he had a strange feeling that he was being watched. However, no matter how hard Grim tried, he could not locate the mysterious guy who had been hiding in the dark and spying on him. It wasn't the Oracle Tower's scroll scholars, because those guys had turned into giant eagles and clouds. Although they hid very well, they still couldn't escape Grimm's mental perception. It couldn't be someone sent by the Magus Association either. Based on what Grimm knew, the Association was in much more trouble than the Central Continent. The ones who came out of Black Ink Valley were the Lords of Calamity that dominated the multiverse. They were stronger than the abyssal demons in every aspect. If they were still in the mood to stir up trouble in the Central Continent, Grimm wouldn't mind taking a stroll in the east and seeing the sights of Black Ink Valley. While Grimm had never confirmed the existence of that mysterious figure, he could feel the plane's consciousness warning him of danger through the laws of the plane. Having just repelled the abyssal invasion, he had a close relationship with the plane's consciousness. It was understandable that he would be treated this way. It was a pity that Grimm didn't know much about foresight and divination, so he couldn't get more detailed information from the plane's consciousness. As for Alice, she had been invited to the spirit realm by Star Spirit Turaz some time ago and had yet to return. Hence, Grimm could only observe silently and compare carefully, hoping to use the AI chips help to find the location of the Watcher. It was a pity that the other party seemed to be a powerhouse with special methods. No matter what he did, he could only guess the other party's existence, but he couldn't prove it. This gave Grimm an ominous premonition. Grimm stood still in his original spot. Over the past few days, his only job was to stand guard here and let the flames that surged out of the heart of Law slowly radiate and transform his body. He only had 3 pieces of magic equipment on him. The Vulcan bead was stuffed into the heart of Law, turning into a blazing ball of fire. Extremely pure fire energy surged out from within. This energy contained extremely dense laws of fire, and it was like boiling lava that burned the heart of Law to the point where it split open his flesh and scorched his flesh. However, with Grimm's powerful life force, new flesh was reborn from the scorched and withered flesh, replacing the damaged parts. However, the new flesh was unable to withstand the scorching heat of the flames of Law, and it was scorched and withered once more. In this repeated cycle of scorching, rebirth, scorching, and rebirth, a few strange golden particles of flesh were refined. They looked no different from ordinary flesh, but they had the power of Law that was almost completely compatible with the inextinguishable flames. Not only would these golden particles not be scorched by the flames of Law, they would instead become stronger and more energetic as they collided with the flames. Grimm's heart had swelled to the size of a house, but an hour of torment had only produced a golden particle the size of a soybean. It would take at least 15 years of painstaking effort to completely replace the heart of Law with this golden particle. Modifying the heart of Law was actually to create a heart for the Vulcan bead to bear the power of Law of rank 5 flames. This process was long and painful, and it would require the use of some extremely rare Magus resources to speed up the process. To Grimm, the Vulcan bead was the source of his power, and its use could not be replaced by other items. It could be said that Grimm's entire power system after advancing to rank 5 revolved around the Vulcan bead. Even the Book of Darkness, which was also at rank 5, could only take second place and could not compete with the Vulcan bead for the core position. Apart from these 2 rank 5 divine equipment, the only equipment that could continue to grow with Grimm was the Focus Crystal. As for the other Magus equipment, due to the difference in rank, Grimm could no longer rely on them to fight. He could still use some rank 4 Magus equipment, but every time he used it, it meant that the equipment's lifespan would be greatly reduced. As for those below rank 4, they could not withstand the weight of life. It was likely that the moment Grimm's flame energy entered it, it would explode into a sky full of fireworks. If the Magus equipment itself was destroyed, they would naturally be unable to display their effects. After all, with their materials and refining methods, they would not be able to withstand the power of Laws. Hence, from today onwards, Grimm would have to be like the other great magi. He would have to painstakingly search for resources and forge a high-grade Magus equipment for himself. At the moment when Grimm calmed down and closed his eyes to meditate, at the edge of the great spatial crack, An old wizard wearing a pointed hat and a gray wizard robe was silently observing him. He held a tall wizard staff in his hand. This old magus had a hunched back and was no taller than 7 meters. Compared to Grimm's huge body that was 1,000 meters tall, he was like a tiny ant at the foot of a giant, armored rhinoceros. However, his existence had clearly transcended everyone's vision and perception. Although he was standing in a remote area, there were still many magi in charge of guarding the area passing by. When these magi scanned the old magus with their eyes or spiritual senses, all they got was a lone piece of scorched rock. There was nothing strange about him at all. Hence, there were many people passing by the old magus. The magi in charge of guarding the area changed again and again, but none of them noticed his presence. He had already been there for more than 10 days. He had been there since the moment Grimm had chased away the abyssal fiend. He stood there silently, observing Grimm's every movement and every trace of his soul aura. The more he watched, the more interested he became. He was already filled with curiosity and astonishment towards Grimm. Chapter 1394. AI. Chip, you still haven't found that bastard? Beep. Panoramic scan and terrain matching initiated. No abnormalities found at the moment. Recommending host to use the law of fire as the core to cast Firewave Ray and conduct a scan. Firewave Ray? Is this the application of the law of fire that you just arrived? Yes. After stepping past the 4th rank and entering the 5th rank, it can be said that the body of a magus has undergone a qualitative change. Past battle methods and methods are no longer suitable for enemies at the level of a Grand Magus. Hence, discovering and deriving high-grade applications of the power of laws is a top priority. Otherwise, the host will lack the means to deal with enemies at the level of a Grand Magus. Grimm nodded his head silently. This mysterious enemy had hidden himself so deeply that the will of the plane would send him a warning. All these signs pointed to the possibility that the other party was far beyond the scope of an ordinary enemy, and was a terrifying rank 5 opponent. Who could it be? Medusa, the Magus Association, or the Silver Alliance? If it was the Magus Association with such powerful reinforcements, they would have prioritized Deep Ink Valley. Why would they send them to the center of the continent? He had an agreement with the Silver Alliance before the war. As long as he did not harm their interests, they had no reason to send such a terrifying opponent. From the looks of it, could it be another assassin sent by the great witch Medusa? Grimm cursed inwardly at the thought of this. It could be said that his rough and bumpy journey was almost accompanied by the various conspiracies and calculations of the great witch Mesa as he grew up. If he had the ability and the opportunity in the future, he did not mind dragging that despicable fellow down from her pedestal and ruthlessly stomping her into the mud. Only in this way could he vent the anger in his chest. Send me the spell model of the Firewave Ray, Grimm ordered in a low voice. In the next second, an abnormally large amount of data surged and churned in his mind, quickly forming a 3-dimensional and complicated spiritual model. There were 1,027 magic circuits, 368 energy nodes, and 13,119 rune lines. The runes involved covered the 3 major systems of arcane spells, and magic, and there were 689 of them. Such a complicated spell formation was only one of the simplest probing spells among the rank 5 spells. One could only imagine the difficulty of other rank 5 spells from this point of view. More importantly, the Tier 5 spell wasn't powered by the magical elements of the past, but by the power of laws. This also meant that even if this spell model was given to a grade 4 magus, he would not be able to cast it. Although Grimm had already refined the law of fire, his mental power was clearly not up to par. With the help of the fire god's bead, Surefoam might be able to control the Tier 5 spell in advance. However, if he wanted to display the true might of a Tier 5 spell, he would most likely have to wait until he reached Tier 5. Since the AI chip had already deduced the flame light wave, Grimm received all the information about this spell when it was transmitted to his mind. This also meant that even though it was Grimm's first time casting this spell, he was already very familiar with it. It was as if he had cast it thousands of times before, and there was not the slightest bit of unfamiliarity or sluggishness to it. After closing his eyes and pondering for a moment, Grimm, who had turned into a 1,000-meter-tall giant, suddenly opened his eyes and used his terrifying spiritual sense to issue an order. All magi present, enter the wizard's pagoda immediately. Without any explanation or preconditions, Grimm's order was quickly transmitted to the minds of every human magus who were busy around the space crack. Although they were a little confused, no one dared to question the orders of a powerful being. Therefore, in just a quarter of an hour, the densely packed space rift had become completely silent, and not a single person could be seen. Congress, are you going to hide or stay here watch the show? There's an uninvited guest here, and I want to force it out. Grimm's spiritual force quickly connected to the demigod Lich Kongness. He was currently on a high ground, taking out a small and exquisite alchemy item and tossing it onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, it had expanded into a magic laboratory that spanned 100 meters. Hearing Grimm's question, he straightened his body in shock. The soul flame hidden behind the large ruby in his eye sockets scanned the area, but he didn't find anything out of the ordinary. It can't be. Not only does Grimm have terrifying offensive capabilities, but his detection abilities are also better than mine. As he cursed, he snickered coldly. Do whatever you want. I won't participate. To be honest, he also wanted to see how Grimm was going to force an enemy that he couldn't even detect to show himself. If he could learn a thing or two about the usage of high-ranked energy, it would be worth it even if it had to take some risks. Grimm didn't try to hide anymore after getting Connis's answer. He lowered his huge body and scanned the empty battlefield with his bright eyes. He said in a deep voice, "Honorable guest, are you going to show yourself or be forced out by me?" The land was empty, and only the exposed charred black bedrock of Swangor revealed the horror of the previous battle. Come out then. Grimm roared and raised his hands. An unusually large spell formation appeared around him. An incredible amount of flames surged out of his palm, transforming into balls of strange ripples that looked like both light and fire, quickly spreading in all directions. It didn't have the terrifying aura of inextinguishable flame. Instead, it carried a strange ripple of laws. Everywhere it went, the sky remained the sky, and the earth remained the earth. Nothing in the world changed, as if the ripple of laws didn't have any destructive power. However, the strange thing was that when the light flowed to the old warlock's feet, the laws of fire within it clashed with the defensive spells around his body, triggering a strange reaction. It was as if he'd used a potion. The old magus appeared on the spot and entered Grimm's and Cognis's perception. There's really someone. That was Cognis's first reaction. The ripple of flames was strange. It actually made the flames exhibit the ripple of light. Could Grimm have mastered the law of fire? That was Cognis's most honest reaction. The old magus who suddenly appeared was just as surprised as Cognis. His mouth was wide open and his eyes widened. He looked at Grimm's raised hands and the spell formation around him as if he'd seen a ghost. No, even a ghost would retreat in fear upon seeing the old magus. Only a terrifying specter at the 4th grade or above would be worthy of the old magus's attention. Grimm once again felt the pain of being in a non-human state. His 1,000-meter-tall body looked majestic, as if he could pluck the clouds from the sky with a wave of his hand. However, it would be a great sin to try and talk to the old magus. Grimm bent down and scanned the old magus with a cold gaze. When a wave of flames brushed against the old magus, it was the power of another law that repelled it. That meant the inconspicuous fellow before him was a true magus of laws. He seemed to be stronger than Grimm in terms of age and strength. That made Grimm even more wary. He quickly copied the old man's appearance in his mind and compared it with all the known experts of the magus world in the Chip's database. However, he couldn't find anyone that matched. Grimm and the old man stared at each other for a moment before a warm smile appeared on his face. May I know who you are? Why are you spying on me? Even though Grimm had suppressed his voice, the mutation of his huge body still made his voice rumble like thunder. When the sound rolled across the ground, even the exposed bedrock around the old wizard trembled and buzzed. Looks like he was right. I shouldn't have come back. The old magus shook his head and sighed. Immediately after, he raised his head and stared at Grimm, asking with a strange expression, "Kid, how did you learn that spell just now? If I'm not wrong, you've had the Law of Fire for less than 30 days. I don't think that's enough for you to learn a grade 5 spell, right?" Others might not know, but as a great magus who had lived for thousands of years, the old magus naturally knew how difficult it was. If a person's soul underwent a qualitative change, they would need at least 10 years to adapt to it. Not to mention abandoning the low-grade energy of the past and using the power of laws as the core to create a brand new spell. Even the old magus had spent 100 years before he had painstakingly created his first rank 5 spell. Perhaps only he knew the hardships and frustrations he had gone through. Now that he saw a fellow who could cast a grade 5 spell with a wave of his hand, he naturally had to look at him like he was looking at a monster. Could it be that there really were magus geniuses in this world who could learn without a teacher? However, even a genius magus could not be this heaven-defying. This completely toppled the old magus worldview. To solve the problem in his heart, the old magus squeezed out a benevolent smile and said warmly, "Kid, as long as you tell me honestly how you learned this rank 5 spell, I can guarantee that I won't cause trouble for you today." Sure enough, he's here to cause trouble. Grimm sighed, and his expression gradually turned serious. "What if I don't tell you?" "Hee, then you'll definitely regret your choice." The old magus sneered. For some reason, the moment his expression changed, he could faintly affect the heavens and the earth to rise and fall along with him. Chapter 1395. Or Laws. This eternal question ran through the entire sorcerer civilization. Some sorcerer sages naturally had simple explanations and analyses of this. However, such content had always been classified as high-level knowledge in the sorcerer civilization. Ordinary low-level members naturally had no way of knowing about it. Those sorcerer sages believed that laws were some of the operating principles and basic structures of a plane. Every plane had the ocean of magic as its foundation, the core laws as the world's framework, the secondary laws as the internal veins, and the laws derived from the laws as the flesh and blood of a perfect world. According to this theory, the more laws a plane could bear, the larger it would be, and the higher the plane's level would be. The sorcerer world was an almost perfect high-level plane, possessing a complete system of laws. Hence, the sorcerer world had a very high status in the multiverse, even becoming the main plane of the Kiliacosm. The stronger the sorcerer world was, the more individuals it nurtured would be able to break through the limits of the plane's level, becoming a true powerhouse that transcended the plane. However, it had to be said that success was due to laws, and failure was also due to laws. No matter how big the sorcerer world was, the number of laws within it was still limited. This also meant that there was a limit to the number of super-ranked sorcerers it could bear, and it was impossible for it to expand without a limit. There was once a sorcerer sage who went through tens of thousands of years of experiments and research and came to a basic conclusion. The total number of laws in the sorcerer world should be between 2,000 to 2,300. Each carat was a pit. In other words, the entire sorcerer world could only bear a little more than 2,000 super-ranked individuals. The top buildings of the sorcerer civilization were occupied by these 2,000 super-ranked sorcerers. Once all the laws were occupied, future sorcerers would not be able to advance without the use of laws. If these latecomers wanted to advance to rank 5, they would either have to fight for the control of a certain law with a certain almighty sage, or think of ways to increase the number of laws in the plane and fight for a chance to advance, of course. Those sorcerers who were lucky enough might encounter an almighty sorcerer who had fallen in the depths of the Sea of Stars. This way, the origin laws that they controlled could be released, and a new rank 5 sorcerer could be squeezed in. There were so many rank 4 sorcerers in the sorcerer world, but only a few could advance to rank 5. Why was this so? The main reason was that the path ahead of them had already been taken by others. The other party had thousands, or even tens of thousands of years more experience than them. So it was simply wishful thinking for them to take control of the power of laws from the hands of the sorcerers. Hence, if the Magus world wanted to develop and strengthen, it could only embark on the path of slaughter and conquest, plundering goods, people, souls, resources, and knowledge from other planes. With more of these things gathered, it would naturally nourish and strengthen the sorcerer world's plane origin. The strengthening of the origin would give rise to the corresponding rules of the world, which would also give those who came after a brand new path of development. Therefore, the laws and the plane were one and the same. The more powerful the plane, the more rules it would nurture, and the more individuals that could use the rules to grow. In this way, they would be in an advantageous position when fighting outside. Furthermore, the more dimensional entities went out on expeditions and pillaged, the more powerful the dimensional world would be. It would also be able to nurture more rules for its internal members to develop and strengthen. The two complemented each other and complemented each other. Only then could it develop and expand like a rolling snowball into an almost perfect plane world. The reason why Grimm was able to receive preferential treatment from the Sorcerer Will and stand out among the many Grade 4 sorcerers was because of this. It had to be said that this was directly related to his passion for planar wars over the past hundreds of years. The essence of the Goblin Plane and Lance Plane had all been swept into the Sorcerer world. The knowledge obtained by the Arcane Kingdom, the introduction of the mushrooms from the Spirit World, the unification of the Central Continent, and the resistance against the invasion of the Abyss. Perhaps Grimm could not count all of these, but in the perception of the plane consciousness, they were all great contributions he had made to the development of the Sorcerer world. Each and every one of them might not be that eye-catching, but when they were piled up together, it was enough for Grimm to gain the favor of the plane consciousness, which made it easier for him to control the laws of the world. Hence, Grimm's current achievements were both accidental and inevitable. However, among the many laws of the world, there was a difference between the main and the branch. The inextinguishable flame that Grimm controlled could only be regarded as a small branch of the law of fire. If he wanted to develop in the future, he would have to seize the laws of fire from other planes and fuse them to strengthen the branch of laws he controlled. Of course, if he had the chance to peek at the main branch of the law of fire, that would be great. However, the sorcerer world had existed for hundreds of thousands of years, and the main branch of the law of fire was definitely in the hands of some almighty sorcerers. Grimm's action of peeking at the law of fire would definitely cause them to retaliate and become hostile. Hence, when Grimm chose to step on the path of a fire magus, there were already many enemies in front of him. However, he was still too weak in the past and could not arouse the vigilance and fear of his enemies. However, once he stepped out of the sorcerer world and became a Grade 5 fire magus, he would have to be careful of the attacks and hatred coming from the shadows. Although Grimm had not controlled the law of fire for a long time, it did not mean that he knew nothing about the origin and current state of the power of laws. On the contrary, with the AI, chip's powerful data storage and retrieval abilities, Grimm's understanding and knowledge of the power of laws were far above that of most Grade 5 magi. Hence, the old magus in front of him only had to use the power of laws a little, and Grimm immediately obtained a lot of useful information. At the very least, he knew the system of the other party's power of laws. That was water. The other party grasped the law of water, which was adept at using soft power to counteract the opponent's ferocious attacks, and it also had a supportive effect. Water was the bane of fire. It seemed like the enemies behind the scenes had calculated everything. From these clues, Grimm could faintly see traces of the Great Witch Mace's manipulation. The enemies that should come would always come. Besides, it was much better to place the battlefield in the Magus world than in another plane or in the outer regions. Hence, after confirming the other party's enemies, Grim did not try to rope them in. His enormous body burst into flames with a bang, and he suddenly raised his mountainous flaming hand and slammed it down. Whoosh! A violent explosion sounded. Before the giant flaming palm fell, the exposed bedrock around the old wizard suddenly caved in, revealing a huge palm imprint that seemed to be carved by an axe and a knife. The palm print was 3 meters deep, and there were burn marks everywhere. From afar, it looked like Grim's palm print. The old sorcerer calmly stood where he was, and a powerful and strange force protected the space 2 meters around him. The bedrock he was standing on did not cave in like the surrounding area. It stood firmly in place like a nail. The old magus's staff trembled. A hole seemed to open up in the void beside him that led to the depths of the ocean. Light blue water essence surged out from within. The essence of water flowed around the old sorcerer and quickly condensed into a water giant that was constantly expanding. It raised its 2 blue arms and blocked the huge flaming hand that was slapping down rapidly. Grim's flaming hand and the water giant's arms collided. After an earth-shattering explosion, a frightening energy ripple quickly spread in all directions. Everywhere it passed, all life was annihilated, and everything was turned into powder. Even the Magus, which had barely survived the battle between the abyssal alchemists and Grim, could not escape this time. Wherever the energy ripples swept out, the rocky peaks crumbled and the rocks shattered, turning into a mighty shock wave that swept out dozens of miles away. However, the fire giant and water giant in the center of the battlefield did not move at all. The giant flame hand and the water hand were stuck together, the 2 opposing power of natural order constantly crashing, colliding, and annihilating each other, releasing the elemental destruction that could not be dispelled in the form of energy ripples. Around the battlefield, the war wizard's pagoda, which had just been repaired a few days ago, suddenly exploded with an elemental barrier. Then, the unconcealed energy shock waves lashed at the war wizard's pagoda like long whips. In less than 10 seconds, the war wizard's pagoda broke into pieces, turning into piles of ruins. As for the wizards from the Arden family, if they did not escape in time, they would not have been able to escape. The wizard tower on the horizon was like a traveler who was struggling to move forward in the face of a fierce hurricane. Its whole body was shrouded in dim yellow violent energy shock waves, and it struggled to hold up a force field protection and elemental barrier, barely preserving its existence. As for the demigod lich Kinginas in the middle of the battlefield, his body emitted the aura of 2 kinds of power of laws, one white and one light blue, which turned into an indestructible light membrane that blocked the energy shock waves and the dispersing power of laws. Even though he was in danger, the demigod lich Kinginas' soul fire was burning with excitement and agitation. He stared at the battlefield in the distance without blinking, using all of his mental perception to detect the changes in the energy and laws of the 2 powerhouses. His anxious expression made it seem like he was fighting bravely on the battlefield. With the protection of the water giant, no matter how Grim activated the fire energy and the laws of fire, it would be difficult for him to hurt the old wizard. The old wizard calmly raised his head and sneered. "Little guy, don't you have the virtue of respecting the old and loving the young? You attacked me as soon as you appeared. Hee, then I'll show you the real power of laws." Chapter 1396. Before this, Grim had imagined the true nature of battles of laws countless times. However, due to the scarcity of information, there had never been any reliable information that could be used as a model for research. Today, however, this old magus was like an enlightened teacher, seriously teaching Grim how battles of laws should be fought. However, the price Grim had to pay for this was too high. Mixing the power of laws into elemental spells would undoubtedly increase the lethality and penetrative power of the spells. This was what Grim had always done in the past. However, this was the first time he'd encountered a battle of laws. a strange power of laws that was as soft as water, but incomparably tough, extended from the old Magus body, penetrating into the laws of the Magus world. It then stirred up the laws there, guiding the terrifying power of laws towards Grimm's soul along with his flames. The other party's actions caused Grimm to break out in a cold sweat. No matter how conceited or powerful he was, he could not possibly go against the laws of the entire Magus world by himself. If he did not have a way to deal with this, the stirred laws of the world would turn into a torrent of laws that would instantly crush his consciousness and soul. When that happened, his will as the legendary fire Magus Grimm would cease to exist. Beings of laws that had crossed worlds were indeed terrifying. Their familiarity with laws far surpassed Grimm's, as well as their brand new battle of laws. They were practically crushing him in a domineering manner. In the time it took for a spark to fly off a flint, Grimm was communicating with the AI chip in his mind. Suppression of laws. This is an effective method used by veteran magi of laws to deal with newbies using their techniques and experience. The method of operation is quickly jump through laws and penetrate with your will to draw the opponent's attacks into the world system, using the backlash of laws to launch a counterattack. The AI chip silently recorded the old Magus methods of using laws, calculating and deducing the changes of the battle. Is there any way to deal with this suppression of laws? Grimm did not care about these minor details, only concerned about how to deal with them. There are 7 ways to deal with it. 1. Divide a portion of your spiritual power and create a fire clone to be independent. Temporarily cut off the spiritual connection between the main body and the fire clone, sacrificing yourself to attract the backlash of the natural laws. Note, the success rate of this plan is only 63%. 2. Use the same rules and will to guide the opponent's attack into the world system, borrowing the power of the system to resist the rules controlled by the target. Note, the success rate of this method is only 45%. Third, borrow the power of the Book of Darkness and the Divine Fire Orb to forcefully withstand the backlash of the laws. The estimated success rate is 79%. Additionally, the main body soul will be partially shaken by the laws. There is a 21% chance of light injuries, a 77% chance of serious injuries, and a 2% chance of direct death. For the AI chip reported 7 solutions in one go, but most of them were methods to evade or resist. After all, in a situation where there was an extreme lack of information on the laws of war, the AI chip could only deduce battles based on the information it currently had. It was unable to display the powerful advantage of controlling the battlefield like it had in the past. Grimm weighed the pros and cons and quickly made a decision. We'll use the second method as a way to confront it head-on. Also, be prepared to deal with the third and first option. If we lose the battle, immediately execute it. Over the years, Grimm had gained some understanding of the structure of the world's laws. He knew that everything in the world was derived from different levels of laws of the world and the laws of planes. The main body of the world was made up of laws, but they were derived from the laws of planes that people could come into contact with. Such a structure meant that when one's consciousness passed through it, it would be disturbed by different levels of laws, and the consumption would constantly change. This created a huge variable that was hard to calculate. The general concept of laws jumping meant that when 2 magi of laws clashed with their consciousnesses, they would constantly jump from one level to another or from one law to another. The medium in the middle was ever-changing, and the way laws could be triggered was ever-changing. With the power of laws they grasped as a carrier and their consciousnesses as the main force, they were like 2 surfers wantonly colliding with each other in the world system of laws. If one of them made the slightest mistake, it would cause the backlash of the world system of laws, and they would be at a disadvantage in this battle of laws and consciousnesses. However, if Grimm did not want to dance with his opponent's footsteps, this battle would become a one-sided fight. His opponent had a terrifyingly huge world system of laws behind him. and any law attack he launched could be guided into the system of laws. This way, his opponent could attack Grimm without any restraint through the world's system of laws, and Grimm's hands and feet would be tied, so he did not dare to recklessly fight back. With this method, the old Magus could almost crush Grimm to death with only a small amount of energy consumption. This was a terrifying method. What the old Magus did not expect was that the legendary fire wizard Grimm did not even hesitate for a moment before charging into the world's system of laws. A novice Magus who had not even broken through wanted to play a war of laws with him? The old sorcerer laughed and immediately controlled the law of water to attack Grimm. On the battlefield, the fire giant that Grimm had turned into and the water giant formed from the essence of water did not give way to each other, and they were locked in a stalemate. The terrifying world incinerating heavenly flames and the monstrous waves collided in a frenzy, causing a chain of explosions to transform into energy ripples that turned the entire battlefield upside down. It was as if the void of this plane was going to be torn into pieces. On the plane of laws that no one could see, the two's consciousnesses were tightly entangled, controlling the power of laws to crazily jump about in the world system of laws. Under their disturbance and agitation, the world's rules rippled incessantly, and the operation of the rules that were originally like thousands of gears that were biting together gradually became turbulent and uneasy. In general, under the collision of laws, Grimm would undoubtedly suffer more backlash from the world's laws. However, contrary to the old Magus expectations, although Grimm was only a novice, he did not have the ability to fight back. Although he was not as familiar with the operation and evolution of laws as the old Magus, he was still able to do it well, and the old Magus could not find a weak point that could be defeated in one strike. Just like that, the two of them continued to fight on the plane of laws, gradually causing a huge upheaval in the world system of laws. At this point, both of them were feeling a little regretful. Although the plane's consciousness had given Grimm great care, this care did not come without a price. As one of the culprits who had disrupted the plane's system of laws, Grimm sensed the flow of the plane's feedback in his body as he fought. Yes, as a punishment for disrupting the world's operation, every second he stayed in the system of laws would cause the plane's feedback to disappear a little. It could be imagined that if he did not stop after the plane's feedback was exhausted, his life force would be consumed in the next moment. After all, the plane's consciousness was fair. While it was punishing Grimm, it did not spare the old wizard. Looking at the old Magus' face that was gradually turning purple, Grimm could imagine the old Magus' conflicted feelings of pain and happiness. The only thing he did not know was what price he had to pay to deal with the backlash of the plane's consciousness. Grimm was really curious about this. A terrifying battle of laws had turned into a contest of strength, where both sides spat out blood. This was no doubt out of the two parties' expectations, and it made the demigod Lich Kongness, who was watching from the side, exclaim in satisfaction. In truth, such a terrifying battle between magi of laws was a forbidden zone that no one dared to step foot in. However, this did not affect Kongness, who had the austere winter chest to protect him. He held up a two-colored barrier of laws, blocking all attacks from the elements, laws, and laws. It was an eye-opening experience for him to watch a high-intensity battle of laws at close range. He was currently at the peak of Grade 4, breaking through to Grade 5. Being able to understand and grasp the workings of laws in advance would undoubtedly be beneficial to his future development. As such, even though the two of them were fighting fiercely and the world was shaking, Kongness was still in high spirits. He could not wait to make the battle even more intense. I'm done. The old Magus was the first to give up before Grimm ran out of plane feedback. He was the clone of a Grade 6 Magus, after all. He had paid a huge price to infiltrate and return to the Magus world. The price he had to pay to maintain such a level of power in the Magus world was far greater than what Grimm had imagined. Both of them were in the same plane, and their strength was suppressed to the peak of Grade 4. However, Douglas originally thought that he could crush Grimm with his advantage in the laws of war. Unfortunately, although Grimm was a newbie in name, he was very experienced in dealing with the situation. He had actually mastered the workings of a battle of laws without a teacher and dragged the old magus into a battle of attrition. This was going to cost Douglas his life. He was just a peak grade 4 clone. How many resources and energy reserves could he bring in? If he could not suppress Grimm quickly, he would not be able to afford a battle of attrition. No matter how strong his main body was, the amount of energy he could transmit into the magus world was limited. If this continued, he would suffer a great loss if his clone was devoured by the laws of the magus world. Chapter 1397. Grimm had gained a lot from the War of Laws. Although it was a great loss, it was still worth it. At least, Grimm understood what the so-called War of Laws was. Looking through the history books, the sorcerer world had given birth to nearly 10,000 great wizards above grade 5 over hundreds of thousands of years. Among so many great wizards, there should be more than 2,000 who walked the path of law-defying wizards. This meant that the sorcerer world was close to the limit of the number of law-defying wizards it could accommodate. It would only be more difficult for the wizards who grew up to become law-defying wizards, and it would not be easy. Bloodline wizards focused on the bloodline, striving to purify the power of the bloodline and trace it back to its origin. They wanted to use the power of inheritance to restore the ancient glory of the source of the bloodline. At that time, laws had not existed, and all things had just been born. There were countless creatures in the multiverse that could destroy the world with a wave of their hands, and each of them was tyrannical. Therefore, the ultimate goal of bloodline wizards was to restore the glory of the source of the bloodline. Body-refining wizards were famous for their strong bodies. They were the typical representatives of those who valued the body over the soul. They pursued the most extreme method of body refinement, tempering their flesh and blood into an immortal body so that they could resist any external attacks. Although they called themselves wizards, every move they made was like a group of warriors. The so-called witchcraft was just a tool used to aid in battle. Arcane wizards pursued the pinnacle of alchemy. They did not care about their own bodies, nor did they care about the cultivation and strengthening of the origin of the soul. Instead, they spent most of their energy on alchemy and the creation and strengthening of arcane puppets. They often used arcane puppets as their main bodies, placing themselves in a subordinate position. It was said that the founder of the Silver Alliance, the extremely powerful Grade 9 arcane wizard Patrick, was known as the creator. He had arcane puppets that did not lose out to ancient beasts. The arcane puppets he created all had terrifying power, but they were so exquisite that it was difficult to tell the real from the fake. He had played a part in the Silver Alliance, being able to stand tall for tens of thousands of years. As for law-defying wizards, they were the pinnacle of wizards and spellcasters. After all, magical elements were only at the end of the energy system. In terms of power, they could not be compared to the origin of the power of laws. Therefore, when the elements were cultivated to the extreme, sooner or later, they would also embark on the path of controlling laws. However, there were only so many basic laws in a complete plane world, and most of them were secondary laws derived from these basic laws. They could also be seen as branches of the basic laws. As for the laws, they were even lower. They were the supplementary laws that were derived from the combination of secondary laws and plane space. Basic laws, secondary laws. It was precisely these things that were intertwined and linked with each other to form their own laws, allowing them to construct numerous multicolored and extremely dazzling planar worlds. Magi of laws were the most powerful existences that the Magus world could produce. The source of every law-defying wizard's power came from the origin plane. Although most of their growth came from plundering other planes, the most fundamental part was still deeply rooted in the origin plane. That was why so many law-defying magi left the Magus world to explore the depths of the endless sea of stars. Usually, they weren't too enthusiastic about meddling in the internal affairs of the sorcerer world, But once the sorcerer world was in danger, they were duty-bound to rush back to help. After all, if the sorcerer world was destroyed by others, their roots would be broken too. This was undoubtedly very frightening to the great wizards who had already grown up. Therefore, among the three major Magus organizations in the sorcerer world, the Magus Association was the strongest. Why was that? This was because the Magus Association had produced the most law-defying magi, and they were also a group of powerhouses who were most concerned about the current situation of the sorcerer world. Law wars were also a new form of combat that was derived from within the group of law-defying magi. They used laws as a carrier and their consciousness as a guide, making full use of the close connection between laws to roam the world's laws like a group of surfers. After all, the power of an individual was insignificant. However, once they could borrow the power of the world system, an individual's power could instantly be amplified tens or even hundreds of times. That terrifying power was simply not something that ordinary beings could withstand. Everyone's mental state was different, and the power of laws they could control was also different. When traversing between different levels of laws and laws, there would always be differences in what they were good at and what they were not. In a battle of the void, well, not only did one have to compete in strength, but they also had to understand the technique, especially when it came to sticking to and suppressing the opponent. This also gave the law-defying Magus a chance to dodge and move, giving them a chance to win. However, this was only possible because of the upper limit of the sorcerer world's power. Once Grimm was kicked out of the sorcerer world, the old Magus would not use such complicated and exhausting methods to fight him. Who cares about the strength of the laws? Who cares about the techniques of using the laws? I will use my unparalleled strength to destroy your body and annihilate your soul. At that time, all the ingenious laws and techniques would be useless. Even the carrier was gone, so where would the rules come from? That was why Grimm could not help but sigh in admiration at the wonders of the world. Without the sorcerer world's blessing, no matter how talented he was, he would not be able to resist these terrifying powerhouses that came one after another. Of course, he did not want to reveal the demonic fish bloodline that he had just achieved. Right now, he had already become the target of everyone. Who knew which corner of the world was hiding enemies who were eyeing him covetously? As long as he had a trump card that could turn the situation around, Grimm would have the confidence to stand proudly in the central continent and continue to fight against these powerful magi. The old Magus obviously had the upper hand in this battle of laws. He withdrew his mental force and instantly broke free from Grimm's entanglement, occupying his body once again. Grimm frowned and roared. "Do you think I'll stop just because you said so? Since you're here, you can stay." With that, he did not even give the old Magus a chance to say anything. He opened his mouth wide, and a raging stream of golden flames pressed down on the old Magus like an earth-shattering fire cloud. The old Magus was so angry that smoke was coming out of his nostrils. He wanted to immediately summon his main body from the outer realm and slap this bastard who did not know what was good for him. However, he knew that for great magi like him, returning to the sorcerer world was like smuggling. There was a limit to how much power they could bring into the plane at once. Since he could not quickly kill this legendary fire Magus, he should quickly escape. If he really got entangled here and something happened to this avatar, Douglas's reputation would be tarnished in the outer realm. A great rank 6 Magus had sent out his clone, but it had actually been killed by a little fellow who had not even reached rank 5. If news of this were to spread, it would immediately become a stain that Douglas would never be able to erase for the rest of his life. At the thought of this, Douglas could not help but shiver. The water giant roared and turned into a torrent, breaking through the huge screen of fire that Grimm had set up. It swept up his body and quickly disappeared into the horizon. Grimm did not give chase after the other party after chasing him away. Instead, he stood there silently, as if thinking about something. The AI chip was currently communicating with him in his mind. "Have you found out about this old man's background? I've already looked through the information of all known great magi, but no matching data was found," Grimm muttered to himself, not finding it strange. At rank 5, their lifespans were usually thousands of years, and some even used special methods to live for tens of thousands of years. Hence, it was almost impossible to calculate the number of great magi who had left the Magus world in the past hundreds of thousands of years. Even with Grimm's status as a rank 4 Magus and his control over the central continent, the AI chips database only had 20 to 30 great magi. However, most of the information was incomplete. Many of the great magi in the database had not been in contact with the Magus world for hundreds of years. Whether they were dead or alive, or where they were, no one knew. Even if they died silently in some ancient ruins or in the depths of another plane, the Magus world would not know. At present, the number of great magi who still maintained close contact with the central continent could be counted on one hand. This included the great Magus who had just left the Magus world less than 800 years ago. Compared to the total number of great magi who had left the Magus world, such a small amount of data was like a drop in the ocean. It was normal to not be able to find anything. What is the law he grasped? Grimm asked in a low voice. After such a long battle, the power of laws from both sides had intertwined, and they naturally had a certain level of understanding of each other. Hence, it was reasonable for him to analyze the law that the other party grasped. A secondary branch of the law of water. The law's characteristic is water pressure. It can use the special properties of water to transfer weight, creating a terrifying pressure in a certain area. Moreover, the water giant that the other party created wasn't ordinary water, but water essence that had been purified and tempered many times. It has a powerful amplification effect on the law of water. Water essence? Grimm muttered to himself. In most Magus laboratories, this would probably be classified as a high-grade material. Seeing how easily the other party had created a 100-meter-tall water giant with a wave of his hand, it seemed like he did not value it much. A 100-meter-tall water giant would weigh at least 40 tons. If its body was made up of water essence, its weight would increase by 10 times. It was no wonder that the other party could fight against his 1,000-meter-tall body with a 100-meter-tall head on. As Grimm lowered his head in contemplation, the grade 4 Magus Andrews flew out of the Magus Tower and carefully approached him. The earth-shattering battle of laws had obviously given him quite a fright. Andrews did not know when, but he could no longer see this legendary fire Magus as someone of the same generation. In front of him, even a grade 4 Magus like Andrews trembled with fear and trepidation. Yes, Grimm asked in a low voice. Chapter 1398. The Sorcerer Association was in big trouble. The parchment was a letter asking for help from Domner, the vice president of the Sorcerer Association. When Grimm received this letter, the other two sorcerer organizations would have received similar messages as well. Grimm's gaze focused on the parchment, which flew out of Andrew's hands and hovered in front of him. As the parchment slowly unfolded, the images of the spell stored inside were also unfolded at the same time, showing Grimm a terrifying scene that happened in the Black Ink Valley. In the depths of Black Ink Valley that stretched for thousands of miles, a multi-headed snake lizard with a body of over a kilometer long crawled out of the ground. It was covered in dark green scales. As soon as it appeared, it raised its head and let out a strange, ear-piercing screech, its body emitting a dark green glow. The glow covered an area of 100 meters, and all wizard beasts and monsters within it would quickly fester and turn into puddles of purplish-black liquid. Around it were 3 grade 4 sorcerers, 2 men and 1 woman, dressed in the robes of the Sorcerer Association. The female sorcerer was Grimm's acquaintance, Grimm's Gloria. Of the 2 sorcerers, one was an old acquaintance of Grimm's, the poison sorcerer Savorius. The other sorcerer looked unfamiliar. 3 sorcerers, 3 powerful sorcerers. The 3 powerful sorcerers from the Sorcerer Association surrounded the terrifying multi-headed snake lizard, fighting it madly. Behind the monster, there was a large group of beasts that looked like monsters charging out of the mist in the valley. They had the wings of eagles, the heads of snakes, and the bodies of lions. Their bodies were filled with a disgusting smell of filth. Mutated beasts. They were mutated after being contaminated by the Disaster Lord's disaster aura. Their individual levels were not high. Most of them were grade 1 or 2, but they had the advantage in numbers to the point where there was no end to them. Judging from a number of mutated beasts that were spewing out of the deep Ink Valley, it could be inferred that the Disaster Lords must have connected the valley crack to a plane contaminated by the aura of disaster. Then, they drove all the mutated beasts born in that plane to the Sorcerer World. This was a common trick of the Disaster Lords. They would first create a crack in space, then drive the countless creatures of disaster over to wreak havoc. Regardless of whether these creatures of disaster were dead or alive, their existence would pollute and destroy the laws of the plane around the crack. Once the laws of the plane were damaged to a certain extent, it would be time for the Disaster Lords to send out their high-level subordinates. The dark green Hydra lizard could barely be called a lesser Disaster Lord. It was either a clone of the real Disaster Lord or a high-tier fighter it had enslaved. Either way, their appearance would be a disaster for the Sorcerer World. Other than the Hydra Lizard World, Snake Lizard World, there was a multi-headed snake lizard in the Sorcerer Association. Their basic strength was already at the pinnacle of Grade 4, and their true form was most likely a terrifying Grade 5 creature. In order to deal with these lesser disaster lords of the Disaster Lords, the Sorcerer Guild Alliance, the Sorcerer Association Grimm's Sorcerer Alliance, Wizard Lord, Sorcerer Grimm, Sorcerer God, Sorcerer Had, and Sorcerer Demon had sorcerers. Even so, the situation on the battlefield was not optimistic. A horde of mutated beasts crawled out of the depths of the Black Abyss Valley, charging and attacking the Wizard's Pagoda and the wizard troops around the battlefield like a dark cloud. The intense battle spread from the sky to the ground, then to the trembling underground. It could be said that the entire area within 30 miles of the Black Ink Valley was completely occupied by the mutated beasts. The Sorcerer Association army could only retreat to the perimeter of the War Wizard's Pagoda. With their backs against the elemental barrier, they fought bravely against the endless stream of mutated beasts. The War Wizard's Pagoda was surrounded by lightning, and bolts of lightning descended from the sky, turning large groups of mutated beasts into charcoal or ashes. But even so, they could not defend against the tide of red and black beasts. These mutated beasts could fly and burrow into the ground, and their bodies were covered in hideous bone armor or scales. Ordinary elemental wizard spells would not be able to kill them. Only powerful wizard spells at or above level 2 could slightly restrain their frenzied attacks. The Wizard Association also had an ample supply of cannon fodder. Teams of wizard beasts of all shapes and sizes, each emanating a strong aura of bloodline, emerged from the Wizard's Pagoda under the command of the Association wizards. They also bared their fangs and brandished their claws, bravely fighting against the tide of mutated beasts without fear of death. On the battlefield, the tragic scene of wizard beasts and mutated beasts fighting to the death could be seen in almost every region. It was precisely because of the alarming number of mutated beasts and the 3 powerful Lesser Lords of Disaster that the Wizard Association could not break into the Black Ink Valley, even if they used all their strength, much less purify and dispel the filthy aura on the battlefield. The projection of the battlefield on the parchment only lasted for a short 15 minutes, but the information revealed was enough to send chills down the spines of the spectators. Grimm did not know what the others were thinking, but he knew that if the creatures of disaster had chosen to invade the space crack, the center of the continent would have been filled with mutated beasts by now. Of course, it was much more difficult to pass through the space crack than the Black Ink Valley. In order to accommodate the evil, twisted bodies of the Lords of Disaster, it would take at least half a year of contamination before they could enter the wizard world. This was also the main reason why they had chosen the Black Ink Valley and not the space crack. After the projection ended, the parchment shrank back into a scroll and returned to Andrew's hands. Grimm frowned and said coldly, "Why did the Wizard Association send this over? Do they want us to send troops to help?" Humph, they've probably forgotten what they did in the central continent. Andrews's face was pale, his mind in a daze. He was clearly still immersed in the tragic projection. Hearing Grimm's question, he hurriedly bowed and replied, "The association not only sent this parchment, they also sent a level 3 emissary. Do you think we should meet him?" After witnessing 2 terrifying battles in a single day, Andrews found it hard to bear even with his mental strength. "Let him come. I like to hear what the association has to offer." Grimm could not be blamed for his resentment. If not for the Wizard Association's interference, the matter of unifying the central continent would not have become so troublesome. If not for the fact that he had gained the upper hand and his strength had increased far beyond his enemy's expectations, his hard work over the past few hundred years would have been for naught. A white light flashed from the wizard's pagoda in the distance. A handsome and elegant young wizard wrapped in a layer of white light quickly flew in front of Grimm. Although he had already seen Grimm's imposing figure from afar, he still felt a shiver from the bottom of his heart when he walked up to Grimm's face that was as intimidating as an ancient giant's. Level 3. The level 3 strength that he was usually proud of was not even worth mentioning in front of this legendary fire wizard. He had a feeling that the other party could kill him as easily as crushing an ant with just a slight movement of a finger. The young level 3 wizard in the Wizard Association's standard robe quickly bowed to Grimm and said in a muffled voice, "The association's envoy, Germain, sends his greetings to the great Lord Grimm." In the sorcerer community, words like respect and greatness were not to be used carelessly. The word respect was often used for high-ranking wizards, while the word great could only be used for great wizards. This was an unspoken rule. No high-grade sorcerer dared to break this boundary and enjoy the respect of the great sorcerers as a grade 4 sorcerer. "Great?" Grimm snorted coldly. "Are you trying to make trouble for me?" The young wizard quickly explained, "Lord Grimm, please don't misunderstand. I have no intention of framing or scheming against you. This is what Lord Domner told me before I came. I must treat you as a great wizard when I see you." "Domner," Grimm smiled. "What did he send you here to say?" "Lord Domner said that we had some misunderstandings before, and that's why we had some unhappiness. As for Lord Grimm's loss, the Wizard Association is willing to compensate you." This young level 3 wizard was obviously a man with money and power. He had a soft body, and his posture was extremely humble. He looked like he was welcoming people with a smile. "Compensation? Forget it," Grimm said coldly. "As long as the Wizard Association doesn't interfere with the affairs of the Central Continent in the future. If you're here to apologize on behalf of the association, then go back. You don't have the right." The young wizard's face stiffened, but he quickly forced a smile. "Don't be in such a hurry to chase me away, Lord Domner. I have something to report to you." "Speak." This." The young wizard Germain looked around and saw Andrews standing beside him as well as the demigod Lich standing not far away. He finally clenched his teeth and said, "Lord Domner said that he hopes that Lord Grimm can help the association overcome this crisis for the sake of our previous friendship." "Previous friendship? Haha, Domner sure is humorous." Grimm almost laughed out loud. "I know that I've let you down, Lord Domner. So Lord Domner asked me to bring this." The young wizard Germain's heart was pounding from Grimm's laughter. He took out a small rectangular wooden box from his pocket and respectfully presented it to Grimm. First it was Severus, and now it was Gloria. Grimm had always remembered these 2 gifts. Now that the association was in trouble, they still dared to ask for help. This undoubtedly confused Grimm. Chapter 1399. Grimm grabbed the small wooden box and opened a corner of it. After taking a glance at it, he closed the box expressionlessly and sealed it again. Due to the presence of a force field, no one could see the contents of the wooden box through the distorted space around him. Grimm did not return the wooden box. Instead, he opened a spatial rift and placed the box into a small flame space that he had created. At his level, normal storage items could no longer be used. Storage belts and space rings could not withstand the power of the law of fire in his body, so he could only open a small flame space to store some important items. As long as he was not placed in a strange environment with distorted space, a small space that could be opened and closed at any time with a unique flame brand on it was more convenient and practical than normal space items. This can only stop me from pursuing the evil deeds you've done. There's nothing else to talk about. Stay here for now. Grimm thought for a moment and said in a deep voice, I still have some things to take care of here. When all the grade 4 magi in the central continent are gathered, I'll discuss with them about reinforcing the association. Lord Grimm, please forgive me for rushing you. The association can't afford to wait. Wizard Germain pleaded with an anxious face. Before I left the association, the dark ink valley was already on the verge of collapsing. That can't be. Andrews could not help but refute. Although the calamity creatures are coming at us fiercely, the association has a strong army. It shouldn't be a problem to hold them off for a year or two. Wizard Germain laughed bitterly and said, logically speaking, that's true, but, is there something you haven't told us? I'm telling you, this is the central continent, not the territory of the association. We have no obligation or responsibility to help you defend against the invasion of the other side. So, if there's anything else you haven't told us, you better tell us first. Andrews said with a fierce expression. His family's territory was the most vulnerable in the central continent. If Grimm really wanted to send reinforcements to the association, who would be left to guard the great spatial rift? If it were a few days ago, he would still have the confidence to fight against the invaders from the other planes with the resources and foundation his family had accumulated over the past few centuries. However, looking at the current situation, peak planes like the Abyss and Disaster planes were wreaking havoc in the Dark World. A measly tier 4 magus like himself really couldn't handle so many frightening enemies. Therefore, if they wanted to reinforce the association, he would be the first to oppose it. Hearing Andrew's question, Germain's expression changed. In the end, he gritted his teeth and explained in a low voice, it's not that I want to hide anything, but the situation there is really not looking good. If there were only those 3 lesser calamity overlords, our association wouldn't be in such a sorry state. Most importantly, in the deepest part of the Black Ink Valley, there seems to be a strange monster. Its combat power isn't strong, but it has an abnormally terrifying corruption ability. So far, 1/3 of the wizard beast troops that our wizard association has sent to the battlefield have been corrupted by that monster and turned into mutated beasts. Directly contaminate your wizard beasts on the battlefield and turn them into mutated beasts. Grimm suddenly interrupted and asked, Yes, it's because of that monster that the situation on the battlefield has become so bad. If we can't kill this monster in 10 days, I'm afraid the association will have to give up on the Black Ink Valley and retreat to the headquarters and a few other core territories. Germain's face was full of fear. It was obvious that the monster had left a very terrifying memory in him. Only creatures of laws can do this. Grimm nodded. Without the protection of the same laws, the more normal creatures there are, the easier it is for them to be corrupted by the monster. Now I understand why Domner asked you to come to me. He probably wants to borrow the power of laws on me. Indeed, my lord. Germain saw that Andrews had already guessed it, so he nodded and admitted it. Lord Domner also said that if you were willing to do it yourself, our association. At this point, Germain suddenly stopped talking and used a spell to communicate with Grimm. It seemed that he was promising Grimm some kind of generous conditions. A moment later, Germain returned to the Arden family's wizard pagoda alone, leaving behind the 1,000-meter-tall Grimm, the demigod Lich Kongnas, and Andrews at the edge of the space crack. While Kongnas wasn't a native of the Magus world, he had a basic understanding of the Magus continent after all that time he spent studying it. Seeing Kongnas leave, he was the first to ask, For what I know, you don't have a good relationship with the Wizard Association in the past. What resources did they use to make you change your mind to help a bunch of enemies? Isn't it better for you to stay in the central region and watch as their territory is turned upside down? Sapphira, 2,000 Sith Sapphira. Grim said calmly. 2,000 Sith Sapphira. What a generous gift. But a look of disbelief appeared on Congnus's crystal skull. If you say you agreed to help them because of this Sapphira, I won't believe it even if you beat me to death. They are your enemies. If they are greatly weakened by the disaster invasion, I believe it will be more beneficial to the central region. Andrews did not interrupt, but he seemed to agree with the demigod Lich's wisdom. The Wizard Association was too powerful, so powerful that it could go against the entire wizard continent. If they could really use the disaster invasion to make them vomit blood, the Silver Alliance, the Northern Witches, and the newly risen Central Region would be happy to see them suffer. Grim laughed. If there was no mana wave and it was just a simple disaster invasion, I would naturally watch from the sidelines. But now that the mana wave is raging, if the Lords of Disaster really invade the wizard world, it will be extremely difficult to chase them out. As a member of the wizard world, I have to answer the call of the plane's consciousness and chase away the invaders. Grim's sudden change in attitude made the other two speechless. However, from a sneer on the demigod Lich's face, it could be seen that he did not believe a single word that Grim had said. Grim didn't take offense and secretly sent a few words to the demigod Lich. That's right. That's how I should act. I knew you had some kind of scheme behind the scenes. Kakik, I'm relieved now. The scarlet flames in Congnus's eye sockets danced excitedly. Leave a message to me. I promise I'll send it to that lord as soon as possible. Kakik. Andrews was at a loss. He didn't know what the two terrifying existences before him were plotting. However, he was certain that anyone who was tricked by a law-defying wizard and a demigod Lich must be very unlucky. Very, very unlucky. Andrews, don't stay here any longer. Inform all the Grade 4 wizards in the Central Region and have them come here for a meeting. The time limit is 2 days. Those who don't come will have to bear the consequences. Grim gave the order and didn't say anything else. He closed his eyes and began to recover the energy he'd expended in the battle. At his level, no matter what kind of injuries he suffered, most injuries could be healed by consuming energy. The moment a wound appeared on his body that couldn't be healed, it meant he was at the end of his rope. The mysterious enemy was obviously an extremely powerful law-defying wizard. Compared to him, Grim's understanding of the power of the law was like a toddler learning to walk. They were not on the same level at all. If not for the AI chip's powerful simulations and calculations, Grim wouldn't have been able to drag him into a battle of attrition. After the strange battle, Grim had used a portion of the feedback he'd gained from repelling the Abyss invasion. Most of it had been consumed by the backlash of the laws. While the losses were great, Grim didn't lose everything. At the very least, he now understood the crux of a battle of laws. If he was attacked by the clone of that Magus of laws again, it would be impossible for him to win. However, with his astral beast bloodline that had just formed, he had a slight chance of killing his opponent. Now he just had to wait and see which idiot would walk into his hands. Arden family's wizard tower. In a secret witchcraft room, Wizard Germain was communicating with the headquarters in the distance through a magic mirror. Domhnall's aged face appeared in the crystal. How's it going? Did that Grim agree to help? My lord, he didn't say anything. He only said that he wanted to gather all the Grade 4 wizards in the Central Region for a meeting, but he didn't promise to help. Wizard Germain looked dejected. What's there to be disappointed about? His reaction is already beyond our expectations. Aren't they gathering all the Grade 4 Magi? You need to get in touch with every single one of them before they gather. You can make any promises you need. Germain, do your best. I've already authorized you to open a hidden resource point. As long as you can rope in any Grade 4 Magus, don't be stingy in terms of resources and materials. Chapter 1400. Grim had now become the king of the Central Continent. It only took him a day to gather all the level 4 wizards in the Central Continent at the Arden family's Wizard Pagoda, waiting for him to summon them. Even Ashton, who had been fighting the invaders in the secondary plane the day before, had to use the teleportation spell formation to teleport to the space fissure twice. From this, it could be seen that Grimm's terrifying presence had left an indelible impression on the people of the Central Continent. After the outbreak of the demon wave, everyone had been busy defending their territories and the secondary plane. They rarely had the time or opportunity to gather together. Hence, taking advantage of this occasion, a few magi who were familiar with each other held a small meeting to exchange the information they had on hand. One had to admit that it was good to have a big tree to lean on. The sudden appearance of a powerful wizard like Grimm in the Central Continent had, to some extent, changed the deep-rooted view that the wizards of the Central Continent were generally weak. Grimm's roar towards the world when he appeared out of nowhere had directly affected the situation in the Central Continent. Grimm had single-handedly repelled the attack of the Abyss and resealed the space fissure. He had also intimidated the king of the forest with his imposing manner. As a result, no top-level magical beasts were seen in the recent beast waves. Although the beast waves had brought terrible disasters and continued unrest to many territories, as long as there were no top-level magical beasts to add fuel to the fire, the disasters would only be disasters and would not escalate to the extent of a disaster. The 3 counties in the south and the 5 territories in the north had been attacked by the beast waves to varying degrees. However, the overall damage was still manageable and did not spread to the entire Central Continent. This situation was far better than what the people had expected. Therefore, everyone was no longer as resistant and opposed to Grimm's powerful position as before. The sorcerer world was a spellcaster civilization where strength was the dominant factor and the strong were respected. Many of the Central Continent's wizards were used to being weak and had forgotten the core elements of the wizard civilization. Faced with a legendary fire wizard who had risen to power, they could only adapt and obey. There was no way they could resist. This point had already been brightened by the blood of some people. The Central Continent had been conservative for too long. The internal structure of the Central Continent was closed and rigid. They could not adapt to the new situation at all. Therefore, the Mana Tide this time was a test, as well as a great opportunity to reshuffle the cards. The sorcerer families that were not suitable for them would slowly decline, and some new sorcerer families would be reborn from their corpses. The one who controlled the rise and fall of this family was undoubtedly the most powerful Crimson family. Thus, as Grimm created miracle after miracle and glory after glory, everyone finally accepted his existence from the bottom of their hearts. They also indirectly acknowledged the Crimson family's transcendent status. Thus, under Grimm's command, even though the family was in a state of war and danger, they didn't hesitate to overcome all difficulties and rush here. The situation of the other Magus families was not too bad. Only Ashton's 2 secondary planes were in trouble. On one hand, there was a riot among the natives, and, on the other hand, there was an invasion by creatures from another plane. Although the incidents were different, both made him feel uneasy, and he had no choice but to go there personally to take charge. Ashton suddenly received a meeting notice from his family in the secondary plane. No matter how unwilling he was, he could only helplessly hand over the command to his deputy. He used the teleportation formation to return to his family's territory, then used the public teleportation network to arrive at the wizard pagoda of the Arden family. The bitter battle in another plane, coupled with the bumpy long-distance teleportation, made Ashton a little dizzy the moment he teleported over. But the powerful mental energy of a level 4 wizard allowed him to quickly calm down, and he walked out of the teleportation formation with a solemn expression. A few wizards from the Arden family were already waiting for him, and they quickly bowed to him. "They've all arrived? Even Clara is here?" Ashton could not help but ask as soon as he stepped out of the teleportation formation. He was familiar with Clara and naturally wanted to meet her to find out the purpose of this meeting. "All the lords have arrived. You're the last one to arrive." A middle-aged wizard in a black robe with a sallow complexion greeted him, reporting the latest situation in a low voice. "These bastards. They're always against this and that, but now they're running away so quickly." Ashton cursed in his heart. and decided to set off to find Witch Clara. But before he could leave the teleportation hall, a handsome young wizard with the association's badge on his chest blocked his way. "Sir Ashton, please wait." A level 3 wizard from the association? Why would someone like this be in the Andrews family's wizard pagoda? Ashton stopped in his tracks, slightly confused, and coldly sized up the other party. All this while, the Wizard Association had been too domineering and overbearing, and their relationship with the Central Wizards was not very harmonious. "Sir, can I have a word with you?" The young wizard led Ashton out of the teleportation hall, past 2 corridors, and stopped in a secluded corner. The young wizard quickly introduced himself. "I'm Germain, from the Wizard Association. I'm here to greet you on behalf of Sir Domhnall." "Domhnall," Ashton muttered. "Why did he send you here?" He knew that Domhnall was one of the core leaders of the Wizard Association, and his identity was a little special. It was very likely that he was a clone of a true lord. Ashton naturally knew a thing or two about such secrets. "Sir, you've just arrived, so you might not know. The reason why Mr. Grimm called for this meeting is to send someone to help the Wizard Association." Wizard Germain explained with a smile. "Aid your association? You're joking, right?" Ashton immediately widened his eyes. The association is so powerful. Why would they need the Central Wizard's help? Wizard Germain sighed, and could only repeat everything that had happened in the Black Ink Valley. To be honest, he had repeated the same thing more than 10 times in less than a day. Black Ink Valley, disaster invasion, mutated beast tide. The situation was collapsing. Ashton silently listened to the other party's description, and a gloating smile appeared on his face. These days, he had been busy with the war in the 2 secondary planes, and had no time to care about matters outside of his family. Now, it seemed that the Wizard Association was also in a mess. For some reason, all the wizards and the Central Wizards seemed to have the same expression on their faces when they heard the news. Wizard Germain was already used to this. "Sir Ashton, our association is currently in urgent need of help from the Central Wizards. If you can promote the aid plan in the meeting, our association is willing to." Speaking up to this point, Wizard Germain's voice suddenly became low, and he switched to communicating with Ashton in secret language. The two then fiercely haggled in that secluded place. After a full 15 minutes, the two still could not come to an agreement. Wizard Germain's face was full of hesitation and awkwardness, as if he could not make a decision at the moment. Ashton's expression suddenly changed, and he listened for a moment before saying, "You still haven't made up your mind? Clara has already informed me to go to the meeting. If I miss this opportunity, I won't agree to any of your conditions." "All right, then everything will be as you wish." Wizard Germain gritted his teeth. "I'll order someone to send the thing you want to your family. I'll be counting on you for the meeting later." Ashton nodded his head in satisfaction. Since the outbreak of the demon wave, this was the only thing that made him happy and satisfied. Although the crisis of the secondary plane couldn't be resolved, with this material, it would make up for what he didn't have. The meeting place of the wizards and the Central Wizards was still in front of the dimensional crack. Grimm condensed a huge cloud of fire and floated it in front of his chest. This way, both sides would not have to shout at each other. Mary and the others were also summoned back when they were chasing after the Grade 4 demons. In just half a month, among the 3 demons that escaped, the 6-armed snake demon was captured by Mary and imprisoned in the Viscero. As for the high-tiered Balrog, the sorcerers killed it and skinned it, turning it into a pile of Tier 4 materials. As for the remaining Quaset, it escaped into the dark forest. It would probably take more effort to catch it. But with this, the central continent was considered to have stabilized. As long as they sent people to guard the dimensional crack after it was sealed, the first wave of the demon wave could be considered to have passed. Although the Grade 4 wizard families were still in a mess, at least their territories were not breached, and their mortal kingdoms were not massacred. This was already a blessing in disguise. Of course, the famous legendary fire wizard in front of him had to play a part in this. Grimm gathered everyone and looked around. He said calmly, "The reason why I've gathered everyone here is because I have a difficult decision to make. Andrews asked Germain to come over and have him explain the situation. Soon enough, Wizard Germain hurried over and explained the purpose of his trip in detail, as though he had never had a private discussion with him before. In the end, Andrews took out the parchment and activated the rune array inside to play the recorded battle projection again. Everyone was shocked. To be honest, it was one thing to have a secret discussion in a warm and safe room, but when they saw the bloody scene on the battlefield, they could not help but feel a little shaken. Chapter 1401. The Magi of the Central Continent were not stupid. They could tell that the invasion at the Deep Ink Valley had exceeded the scope of an ordinary plane invasion. It was a little like a war of laws. The biggest difference between a war of laws and a war of planes was that the former was purer and more direct. A war of planes might involve a lot of interests, resources, population, and knowledge, but a war of laws was purely a battle between factions. In the entire multiverse, the Magi civilization was seen as the source of evil along with the calamities, abyssal creatures, subterranean creatures, and undead creatures. But in essence, they were still in completely different camps. Magi and undead were seen as the representatives of lawful evil. They did things by hook or by crook, only seeking the final result. However, within the group, there was a strict hierarchy. When there was no direct conflict of interest, the higher-ups had a weak duty to protect and take care of the weaker ones, while the lower-ups had to follow the wishes of the higher-ups. As for the calamities and abyssal creatures, they were the typical representatives of chaotic evil. In their camps, the superior had absolute control over the inferior, and the inferior did not have any individual power. Both sides were in a position of dominance and being dominated. Moreover, chaotic evil creatures did not have any rules to speak of. Sometimes, even they could not completely control their next move. At least the Magi still followed the basic rules of fair trade, equivalent exchange, and other rules. But the abyssal demons and calamities all believed in the bloody and barbaric rule of whoever has the bigger fist takes everything. They would not make any deals or negotiations with others at all. Killing and plundering occupied almost all of their minds. Therefore, when the Abyss invaded the planar world, there was no possibility of negotiation between the two sides. It was impossible for each side to take a step back. They did not care how much land they occupied, nor did they care how rich the land was. They risked their lives to invade other planes just to kill and plunder. Kill all targets that can be killed, and plunder all resources that can be plundered. From life to soul, they would not let a single one of them go, until that place became a paradise of death, and even the plane origin was plundered. In the end, the broken continent would also be dragged back to the Abyss plane, becoming a part of the extremely huge Abyss. The calamities were no different from the abyssal demons. They liked to invade one plane after another, using their powerful evil consciousness to pollute the plane origin, thus turning it into their new territory. The corrupted origin of the plane also lost control of itself, distorting all the living creatures living within it into terrifying mutated beasts. Through this method, the Lords of Calamity would have an entire plane supply of new soldiers. Then, they would order these new subordinates to invade even larger planes, expanding the territory of chaotic laws like a rolling snowball. Therefore, the reason why the Calamities chose to invade the Magus world was because of the conflict between the laws of chaos and the laws of order. Thus, the reason why the Calamities chose to invade the Magus world was ultimately because of the conflict between the laws of chaos and the laws of order. However, in the face of such a collision and invasion of the laws, both sides had no leeway at all. They could only fight with force and see whose fist was tougher in the end. Although the wizards of the Central Continent were not enthusiastic about helping the Sorcerer Association, they could not resist the hatred and rage of the sorcerers towards the creatures of disaster. Hence, under the influence of the plane's consciousness, all Magi hated these creatures of calamity from the bottom of their hearts. Coupled with the association's enticement, 8 out of the 13 rank 4 magi from the central continent chose the aid plan. Andrews, Milva, Mila, Ashton, and Auderic were firmly against sending reinforcements. At a glance, the objectors were all people who were facing huge challenges within their families. With such a big space crack in Andrew's territory, it was destined that he would have to tremble with fear during the entire period of the demonic tide, not daring to relax even a little. Milva was no better off than Andrews. His Anemder Academy was at war with the underworld. The evil creatures that had been hiding in the dark and gloomy underground space all year round were affected by the magic tide and wanted to come to the surface to plunder. Naturally, Anemder Academy, which was blocking the exit to the surface, became their primary target. It was said that the two sides had already fought 2 or 3 times on the shallow surface of the underground, and both sides had suffered considerable losses. However, the Anemder Academy relied on the spell facilities and dense spell traps that had been carefully built over hundreds of years to keep the subterranean creatures at bay. However, relying on their own strength to fight against the entire underworld, no one knew how long Anemder Academy could last. As for the other 3, Mila, Ashton, and Auderic, they were all unlucky fellows whose territories were facing a severe beast tide or invasion from another plane. Before putting out the fire in their territories, they obviously did not want to invest their strength in Mayuan Valley, which was completely out of reach. Calamity invasion? Then let them invade. With the Magus Association at the front, no matter how terrifying the Calamity Lords were, it would be difficult for them to pass through hundreds of thousands of miles of black forest and wreak havoc in the central continent. It was this dark mentality that made them make the choice that best suited their own interests. Out of the 13 rank 4 magi, 8 were willing to fight, while 5 were against it. The remaining choices were left to Grim and Mary. As the leaders of the central continent's magi, they had the power to suppress everyone else. Naturally, their choice would represent the entire central continent. Grim's gaze swept across the faces of the magi, and a strange expression appeared on his face. He knew that almost half of the 8 magi who agreed to fight were just there to make up the numbers. They did not really want to help the Magus Association, but they thought that Grim would never agree to the association's conditions. This way, even if they patted their chests and stood up, they would not have to fight because of Grim's veto. This way, both sides would owe each other a favor, and it would undoubtedly bring them additional benefits. Grim laughed involuntarily, and then his expression turned serious as he said in a low voice, "Considering the development of the Magus world, allowing the Calamity creatures to invade is clearly not in the interest of the Magus civilization as a whole. Thus, I've decided to send troops to help the Magus Association." It was as if a huge bomb had been dropped into the depths of a frozen abyss, and the expressions of the Magi present all changed. "Since most of you have agreed to fight, I'll distribute the tasks. The spatial crack cannot be guarded by powerhouses. While I'm leading people to fight, Mary and Andrews will be in charge here to ensure the stability of the plane. Merva, I don't care how you fight with the subterranean world, but I won't allow any subterranean creatures to appear in the central continent during this period." "Yes, I'll definitely guard the exit." Merva hurriedly wiped the sweat off his forehead, feeling a little glad that he had not chosen to fight because of the temptation of benefits. The situation in Animundo Academy was not looking too good recently. The subterranean creatures were like madmen, constantly attacking the exit on the surface. If he, the person in charge, was transferred to the east, the Academy would no longer be able to suppress the rampaging dark creatures. Mira, Ashton, and Auderic, stay in your family's territory and continue to resist the beast tide. Do not let them break through your defenses and wreak havoc in the central continent. Yes, yes, yes. The 3 nodded in unison, their foreheads dripping with cold sweat. Monash, Gaia, although you've chosen to fight, the central continent needs powerhouses to hold down the fort. While I'm gone, you'll be in charge of the coordination and safety of the entire central continent. I'll get Meryl and Amelia to work with you. Yes, The Gold Tribe leader took a step forward and nodded in agreement. As for the rest of the Magi, Grimm looked around and said indifferently, "Since you're all so enthusiastic, come with me to fight." The Magi looked at each other and could only bow their heads and accept the order. In the crowd, the weaker ones like Matthew, Nicholas, and the others all had bitter expressions on their faces, as if they had swallowed a gallbladder. Indescribable resentment and grievance burned their souls like wildfire. If they were given another chance, they would never covet that insignificant little benefit and place themselves in the middle of a terrifying clash of laws. Puffed. That bastard Germain, he's done me in, right? Doesn't Grimm have a grudge against the Magus Association? Why did he agree to help them? Is there some secret that we don't know about? Everyone get ready. We'll set off tomorrow. All right, you guys can go now. Hearing Grimm's order, the Magi from the central continent could only bow and return to the wizard's pagoda. Looking at their bitter and resentful expressions before they left, it was obvious that they wanted to treat Wizard Germain, who had led them into a trap. As for the Magi with ulterior motives, they were curious about Grimm's sudden actions. As soon as the meeting was adjourned, they gathered together and discussed Grimm's intentions behind his actions. Was Grimm a fool? If Grimm was a fool, then the Magi from the central continent who had been suppressed by him were a bunch of idiots who were worse than fools. Was the Magus Association willing to give them enough benefits? As long as Grimm was not crazy, he would not give up on the chance to weaken the Magus Association just because of some external benefits. What were benefits compared to the bigger picture? Even if the Magus Association brought out a mountain of magical crystals, treasures, and resources, it would not be as good as the opportunity to watch the Magus Association suffer a great loss of power and allow the other organizations to rise. Therefore, no matter how much they analyzed, they could not find a reason to change Grimm's mind and help the Magus Association. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.